Chapter 1197, 10-million-year-old plot. Chapter 1197, 10-million-year-old plot. What? Wu's expression changed drastically, and he exclaimed, "Lan Yun, you're still not dead?" He looked at the corpse on the floor. Hee. There was a chuckle, and the blue-skinned corpse on the floor surprisingly crawled up. A long shadow was cast by its 9-meter-tall figure. Ling Han and the others were all astounded. Although they had been suspicious whether the mysterious being was the true owner of this place, they were still stunned to see the blue-skinned elite get to his feet. Wu just stared at the blue-skinned elite, and he started to laugh loudly after a short while, saying, "So, you truly are dead. Your body is merely being controlled by a wisp of your remnant awareness." "Indeed," the blue-skinned elite said with a nod. "However, it's more than enough to kill you." Wu's expression changed, and he said with a hint of panic, "You didn't purposefully set this up, did you? Were you waiting for an opportunity to kill me? For my divine sense to leave the land's heart and possess another body?" The blue-skinned elite laughed loudly and said, "Or else, you had fled to the land's heart, and I hadn't been able to pursue you in my dying state. If I didn't draw you out, how would I be able to deal with you?" Such forbearance," Wu said. "It's already been tens of millions of years, and your corpse has almost turned to dust. Why are you still holding on to such old grudges? Why do you insist on killing me?" "Humph. Even if I die 1,000 times over, I still won't forgive wretches from the netherworld," the blue-skinned elite roared. "What? This mysterious being is actually from the netherworld?" At this moment, it finally made sense why the words carved by the blue-skinned elite were filled with fury and killing intent toward the netherworld. From the signs of battle outside, it could be deduced that an intense battle had broken out between the two elites. The blue-skinned elite had probably won, but suffered fatal wounds. Meanwhile, the body of the mysterious being had been obliterated such that only his divine sense remained. However, due to the unique nature of beings from the netherworld, he had been able to hold on to life in the land's heart. Tens of millions of years had passed, and the mysterious being thought that the blue-skinned elite had died. Thus, he came out to possess someone's body so that he could live a second life. Anyhow, the restriction in this mystery realm was most likely used to suppress the mysterious being and limit his activity to the palace. Otherwise, this mysterious being should have escaped long ago with the great number of times that this mystery realm had already been opened. The mysterious being had simply thought that the restriction was in place to suppress him for all eternity. However, he hadn't realized that this was a double-layered scheme. The restriction was merely in place to give him a feeling of security, to make him believe that he could possess someone and escape. Now, however, his physical body was unbelievably fragile. Wu trembled in apprehension. He hadn't been this nervous and terrified even when his original body had been obliterated. He had only just possessed this body, so it was impossible for his divine sense to leave. "Lan Yun, how scheming of you," he spat through gritted teeth. "Against a coward like you, how could I not scheme?" The blue-skinned elite smiled and continued, "Don't even think about wasting time. Although this is only a wisp of my awareness, I can still stay around for 3 to 5 days." Wu's expression changed again. He had indeed wanted to waste time. Unlike him, the blue-skinned elite had genuinely died. There was only a wisp of his awareness remaining, and it was like a flame without fuel. It would disappear in no time. However, 3 to 5 days was still too long. This blue-skinned elite absolutely despised beings from the netherworld, so how could he last for 3 to 5 days? Even if he spoke until his mouth was cracked and dry, it still wouldn't be long enough to grind through 5 days. The blue-skinned elite attacked and said, "Sinking shade, old demon, accept your death." Boom! A terrifying power swept through the palace, and even the mystery realm shuddered. This was a power that transcended the heavenly body tier. Why didn't the restriction attack him? What a joke. Of course it didn't. He was the owner of this place, so why would the restriction attack him? Boom! His palm struck down, and Wu instantly transformed into a cloud of blood. His body was far too fragile, and there was simply no way it could withstand power at the Eternal River tier. However, the blue-skinned elite didn't let his guard down. Instead, he continued to scan the surroundings with his divine sense. Elites from the netherworld weren't easy to kill. He had obliterated this mysterious being's body in the past, yet his divine sense had still managed to escape. Humph! Still trying to escape? The blue-skinned elite struck at the door. Pong! The large door shattered, and they saw a shadow frantically streak out. This shadow was extremely hard to catch with the naked eye. It was the elite from the netherworld. Ling and the other king tiers all sucked in a sharp breath. An Eternal River tier elite with a huge advantage in cultivation level had attacked him, yet he had still been able to survive and flee. The being from the netherworld was unfathomably powerful. Lanyun, you actually forced me to use this technique. Even if you die, I'll still grind your bones to dust. The shadow flew toward the yellow spring in the sky. This yellow spring was formed from the corpse of the netherworld elite, so his power would increase by an immense amount if he fused his divine sense into it. However, his previous body had already died, so the yellow spring would still be extremely dangerous to him. It was like a potent poison. Even so, he had no option but to take a massive gamble. Otherwise, he would definitely die. As long as he survived, there was hope that he could heal his wounds, no matter how severe they were. The blue-skinned elite humphed and said, I've plotted for tens of millions of years now, so how can I fall at the final hurdle? His body flashed, and he dashed out at an incredible speed. His fist smashed into the yellow spring in the sky. Star-plucking step? Ling exclaimed in his mind. Although he still hadn't started to cultivate this movement technique yet, he could still recognize it at a single glance. Hua! The yellow spring was severed in the middle. The blue-skinned elite shuddered, and then transformed into a giant that measured 3,000 meters in height. He blocked the flow of the yellow spring as he stood proudly in the sky. You! The netherworld elite wanted to vomit blood. He could no longer draw on the power of the yellow spring. His voice shrill, he shouted, You're blocking the power of the dark yellow spring with your body, so you'll turn to bones in no time. If you want to die, fuck. He had subconsciously treated the blue-skinned elite as a living person. However, he quickly came to his senses. Although this blue-skinned elite was jumping around and attacking him, his vitality had already disappeared long ago. He was merely a remnant wisp of awareness that definitely couldn't last for long. That being the case, what did it matter whether his body disintegrated or not? After all, he had already been dead for tens of millions of years. Haha, I've been waiting for this day. The blue-skinned elite thrust his palm toward the shadow. Countless divine patterns intertwined, and the glow of regulations radiated brilliantly. This was the true power of Eternal River tier elites. No! The netherworld elite wailed in despair. His wail instantly traveled throughout the entire mystery realm. This was the despairing cry of an Eternal River tier elite. A thick sense of loathing and agitation hung in the air. There was also a harrowing eeriness. This was a martial intent that was unique to netherworld cultivators. It's finally over. A relieved smile spread across the blue-skinned elite's face. Boom! His gigantic body crashed down, rapidly shrinking in size as it did so. It was then washed away by the yellow spring, becoming one of the tens of millions of wraiths. A supreme elite had finally disappeared from this world once and for all. Ling and the 5 other king tiers were all speechless. They had been close to useless in this battle. They had simply been used as bait. They were the prodigious king tiers of the younger generation, yet they had actually fallen to the level of mere bait. Chapter 1198. The Rain Emperor had disappeared. Chapter 1198. The Rain Emperor had disappeared. They were prodigious king tiers, yet they could only act as mere bait. This left Ling and the others feeling extremely uncomfortable. However, this was the undeniable truth. As prodigious as they were still mere trash before power at the Eternal River tier. The death of Wu Zhe was a bloody reminder of this fact. He had become a host to the divine sense of a netherworld elite, and in the end, he had been mercilessly killed. Before the blue-skinned elite, even the most talented prodigies of this galaxy were like fragile debris. They didn't even have the right to make him hesitate. This was a fate that could befall any one of them. However, why had such a fate befallen Wuxia? That was simply because he had been the weakest member of the 7 king tiers. He was the easiest to possess, and thus he had been chosen. The king tiers were unable to accept this. They could die in battle, but dying like this, it was far too vexatious, and it was far too meaningless. However, whom could they complain to? The blue-skinned elite had died, and the netherworld elite had also been killed. Wuxia, the unfortunate victim of all this, had also died. The 6 king tiers remained silent for a long time. Only the yellow spring continued to crash through the sky. This river was formed from the corpse of an eternal river tier elite, and it continued to flow even tens of millions of years after his death. It was as if it would flow for all eternity. At this moment, they all understood why this yellow spring felt so eerie and so harrowing. This was because it contained power from the netherworld. "Let's explore the palace and see if we can obtain some more secret techniques," Shurangwa said. He was the first to break the silence. Everyone nodded in agreement. What was done, and the dead couldn't be brought back to life, either. Moping over this matter wouldn't be of any help. They returned to the palace, where the light orbs still silently hovered in the air. However, these light orbs would still dash away when they tried to grab them, giving them no chance of obtaining the secret techniques inside. By the looks of it, their strength was insufficient to obtain these light orbs. As king tiers of the younger generation, Ling Han and the others naturally knew when to let things go. They resolutely turned around to leave. There were still many valuable items on the way out, such as godly medicines and perhaps some ancient techniques left in the ancient sites. Staying in the palace would be a complete waste of time. If they made their way to the entrance now, they would at least still obtain some treasures. It was just a matter of how much they obtained. After exiting the palace, they all turned around to take one final look. That was where Wuxia had died, though not a single scrap of his being was left. They all shook their head before leaving. After a long time, Ling Han released Shui Yinyu and Hu Feiyun from the Black Tower. When the old ginseng appeared, his expression was dark, and he said, "Sage asterisk Ty brat. What kind of spatial tool is that? Why is it so freakish?" He had almost been planted, and he had almost had his awareness erased by the tool spirit inside. In other words, he had almost become a godly medicine for consumption again. Not only that, but there was even an old divine tree inside, one that was far higher in grade than himself. He had no choice but to obediently call him Grandpa. Moreover, the divine sense of a saint was wrapped around a branch of the divine tree, and this person still terrified him, even though his might was already non-existent. Ling Han chuckled and asked, "Was it fun?" "Fun your mom. See how I stomp you to death. You actually dared to scare your grandpa." The old ginseng became angrier by the second, and he angrily launched a kick at Ling Han. Ling Han casually blocked his strikes. The old ginseng was simply venting his anger, and he wasn't genuinely having a falling out with Ling Han. Thus, he quickly stopped his attacks. "What a hot temper," Ling Han said with a smile. The old ginseng's eyes darted about, and he turned to Shui Yinyu, saying, "Beauty, want to change a partner? I'm definitely more useful than that brat. See, my entire body is exuding a treasured aura. Breathing in a lungful will increase your lifespan by 3 years and make you younger by 10 years. Ow." Ling Han had hammered him on the head, and he instantly grabbed his head in pain. They returned the way they came, and they arrived before the medicinal mountain after just a few days. Ling Han started to undo the restrictions again, and they tried to harvest as much godly medicine as they could. However, undoing the restrictions took an extremely long time, and thus they were forced to set off again after obtaining just 2 godly medicines. They walked against the flow of the yellow spring, and they quickly arrived at the place where they had entered. This place was already brimming with people, as there were only 3 days left before the half-year time limit expired. People naturally came here a few days earlier because missing the exit date and being trapped inside this mystery realm meant death. Master! Ding Ping was the first to run over. Mu Rongqing and the others followed after him. None of them had reached the consummate level of the mountain river tier, and thus none of them had gone to the Eagle Beak Mountain and so on. Instead, they had deviated from this standard route and went elsewhere in search of their own opportunities. This allowed them to obtain quite a bountiful harvest. Huh? Second brother still hasn't returned, Ling Han said as he looked around. Out of those who had entered this mystery realm, only the Rain Emperor was still missing. Feng Piyun and the others all shook their heads. They had each gone their own way, and thus they didn't know what opportunities the Rain Emperor had come across, nor did they know what troubles he had encountered. With second brother's strength and willpower, he should be able to stay safe and escape even if he comes across dangerous situations, Ling Han said. He was confident in the Rain Emperor's abilities. Huh? Sister Shui, Ninth King, why are you ladies also here? Li Weiwei and Ji Yuner walked over at this moment. They were also disciples of the Majestic Heaven sect, so they could naturally enter this mystery realm as well. Ling Han hadn't revealed his identity to them yet, and thus they didn't know that he was Ling Han. They merely found it strange that Shui Yinyu and Hu Feiyun were in the company of an unfamiliar man. This was especially the case with Shui Yinyu. Hadn't she been all lovey-dovey with Ling Han? Perhaps she had dumped him after not seeing him for 3 years. That stupid blockhead. So pitiful. Shui Yinyu nodded at the two women. Hu Feiyun was much friendlier in comparison, and she immediately started to chatter with them. She was extremely young, so she naturally craved friends that were at a similar age to her. She wanted friends with whom she could share her grief and happiness. Fortunately, Hu Feiyun guarded the secret of Han Lin's identity, but this was probably because Li Weiwei and Ji Yuner hadn't asked. If they asked, Ling Han was almost certain that Hu Feiyun would spit out the truth. Ling Han didn't trust this ditzy woman to keep a secret. A day passed, and then 2. However, the Rain Emperor still didn't return. Ling Han and the others started to become anxious. There was only a day until the entrance to the mystery realm reopened, and they would all have to leave at that time. Otherwise, they would remain in this mystery realm forever. What on earth had the Rain Emperor come across? In this anxious atmosphere, the 3rd day rolled around. However, there was still no sign of the Rain Emperor. Wang. The air distorted, and a passageway silently appeared in the sky. They could vaguely see a giant ripping space apart with his hands. This giant was none other than Venerable Trinity. It's time to leave. Let's go. The cultivators started to stream out. However, there were quite a lot of people here, so they couldn't all leave at once. Where's second brother? Why has he still not returned? Mu Rongqing was pacing about in unease. Ling Han was also extremely worried. However, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind, and he said, perhaps second brother is the chosen one. What chosen one? Feng Piyun and the others asked. I entered the abode that belonged to the owner of this mystery realm, and he had left a dying note. He said that, when the 7 stars align, 'tis the time my successor appears. The 7 stars referred to me, He Tao, and the others. It was us 7 who had opened the door to the palace. As for the latter half of that sentence, it's probably saying that the senior will choose a successor. I had initially thought that it would be one of the 7 king tiers. However, by the looks of it now, he probably chose someone else. It's extremely likely that he chose second brother. Chapter 1199. False Accusation. Chapter 1199. False Accusation. Second brother received the inheritance of an eternal river tier elite? Mu Rongqing instantly became excited, saying, that's definitely the case. With second brother's talents, he definitely has the right to receive such an inheritance. Feng Piyun also nodded slowly. He had to admit that the Rain Emperor was supremely talented. In fact, it was possible that he was as talented as Ling Han. That brat is fairly lucky, Helian Tianyun said in envy. Ling Han had speculated thusly to reassure himself and to give himself hope. Otherwise, he would lose his second brother forever. The cultivators continued to stream out, but Ling Han and the others still didn't leave. Although they suspected that the Rain Emperor had been chosen as a successor, they hadn't received any confirmation of this. As such, they weren't certain that this was the case, and thus they wanted to wait for a little longer. In the end, they were the only people still remaining in the mystery realm. "Hurry up and come out," Venerable Trinity shouted. Why were these people idling about? Didn't they know that it was extremely burdensome to keep this passageway open, even for an eternal river tier elite like him? Ling nodded, and then left the mystery realm with the others. Xiao. The passageway instantly closed. "Hurry up and leave," Venerable Trinity said. Understood. Venerable Trinity cleared the path for them as they speedily left the valley. When they made their way out, Venerable Trinity immediately left them and flew into the sky. He Tao, Shinjuer, Ling Han, a heavenly body tier called. These were the names of the 7 king tiers. Return to the sect as soon as possible and report to the 7 Rain Hall. Ling Han and the 5 other king tiers hurriedly accepted this command. However, Wu Zhe would remain in the mystery realm forever, and it would be impossible for him to return to the sect again. In any case, they understood that the Majestic Heaven sect was interested in the inheritances that they had obtained from the palace. The sect had long been aware that the door to the palace could only be opened by 7 king tiers. Thus, now that they had left the mystery realm, the sect would naturally summon them to ask about their gains. If the techniques they received were valuable enough, the sect would naturally make a copy of them. Everyone returned where they had come from, with the disciples of the Majestic Heaven sect returning to the Majestic Heaven sect. If one wasn't from the Majestic Heaven sect, they would return to wherever they cultivated or lived. This was the Death Valley, and there was nothing of worth apart from the Yellow Spring Mystery Realm there. People naturally didn't want to stick around this place for too long. Ling Han and the others didn't leave right away. They still wanted to wait for the Rain Emperor. However, 10 days passed, and there was still no sign of the Rain Emperor. Let's go. If second brother has truly obtained the inheritance, he'll naturally return when he masters his craft. Ling Han nodded after a brief moment of thought. Waiting here was pointless, and he had also received a command to return to the sect as quickly as possible. If this was a command from Venerable Trinity, even Empress Luanxing wouldn't be able to protect him if he arrived too late and offended him. They set off for the Majestic Heaven sect. They had the cloud-piercing shuttle, so their speed was incredibly quick. Although they had stayed at Death Valley for an extra 10 days, they only arrived at the sect 1 to 2 days later than everyone else. Ling Han immediately went to the 7 Rain Hall, a hall that was located on the cloud-piercing peak. However, he didn't see He Tao and the others when he reported his arrival and was summoned into the hall by a Sun-Moon tier elite. They had either come already, or they still hadn't returned to the sect yet. "What secret technique did you obtain in that treasure storage?" the Sun-Moon tier elite asked. By the looks of it, Shinjuer and the others had already reported to the 7 Rain Hall and recounted the events of the Mystery Realm. This wasn't strange. However, did they truly report the secret techniques that they had received? Or did they report some random cultivation technique to conceal the truth? Ling Han was slightly hesitant. Should I hand the star-plucking step over? He had mulled over this movement technique while waiting at the Death Valley and returning to the sect. However, even though he had completed a dozen or so days of comprehension under the reincarnation tree, he still wasn't able to grasp it. In fact, he was still quite a distance away from being able to grasp it. From this fact alone, one could imagine just how high-grade this movement technique was. Should I hand it over for nothing? Rest assured, the sect won't take your secret technique for nothing. We'll definitely compensate you fairly, the Sun-Moon tier elite said. Even if I want to hand over another secret technique to hide the star-plucking step, there's nothing suitable. None of the 9 Dragons Tyrant Body Art, Annihilating Dragon Star Arrow, and Universal 8 Desolation technique was necessarily less valuable than the star-plucking step. In fact, they were perhaps even more valuable. Thus, he pondered for a moment before saying, I received a movement technique called the star-plucking step. Write the secret technique out, the Sun-Moon tier elite urged. We'll reward you based on its quality. Ling Han nodded, and then started to write the movement technique onto paper. After writing for a while, he was surprised to discover that a portion of the inheritance couldn't be written in words. It was something that could be understood, but not described. No amount of words or writing would be able to encapsulate it. However, if this portion was left out, the might of the movement technique would decrease dramatically. He was slightly taken aback. However, he immediately decided to let it go. He wasn't interested in the reward from the sect anyway. He continued to write, and it wasn't long before he finished. "Done?" the Sun Moon Tier Elite asked. He took the copy and immediately sealed it with a decree, not even flipping through it. The decree seal would make it easy to detect whether someone had read the copy before it reached its target recipient. "You can leave now. You'll receive your reward once the grade of this movement technique is determined." Ling Han nodded and bowed respectfully before leaving. He was a very busy person. He had to study pill recipes, and he also had to practice movement techniques. Moreover, he was nearing the peak stage of the pinnacle level, and he would have to comprehend regulations of the Sun-Moon tier after reaching it. This would definitely be time-consuming. He felt like there wasn't enough time. Ling Han cultivated earnestly in reclusion, comprehending pill recipes at times, and practicing the star-plucking step at others. Time slowly crept by. However, a hidden turbulence silently swirled through the sect, becoming more and more serious by the day. Gao Huang lodged a complaint to the sect, accusing Ling Han of wantonly killing fellow disciples and seizing thousand source true fluid that originally belonged to the Gao faction. News of this had originally been confined to the higher-ups, with not many people aware of the complaint. However, it suddenly spread throughout the entire Majestic Heaven sect, and every single disciple was now aware of the situation. The sect instantly erupted in uproar. Killing fellow disciples was a massive taboo, and it was an action that would draw scorn and disdain. However, many disciples had witnessed the battle on the Eagle Beak Mountain and seen a portion of the truth. Ling Han had suppressed the masses and obtained 4 drops of thousand source true fluid. As for whether the members of the Gao faction had died by Ling Han's hands, no one knew. This battle had occurred after the battle for the thousand source true fluid, so no one had been around to witness it. Moreover, the Majestic Heaven sect had Sun-Moon tier disciples in addition to Mountain River tier disciples, and only a portion of people had been at Eagle Beak Mountain to witness the battle. Rumors about Ling Han killing fellow disciples for thousand source true fluid was swirling about, and after a while, these rumors gradually became the truth. Killing fellow disciples and stealing their treasures was an abhorrent act. Ling Han's rising reputation was instantly crushed, and many people expressed their disdain for him. Was such a person worthy of remaining in their sect? A growing number of voices called for Ling Han to be punished severely. Otherwise, the anger of the masses would be unsated. Chapter 1200, Analysis. Chapter 1200, Analysis. Ling Han generally stayed in the Black Tower and cultivated under the reincarnation tree, so he was naturally unaware of the huge commotion outside. It was only when he prepared to go to the Mo clan establishment to collect some pills and pay his debt that he was stopped by Shui Yinyu and informed of the situation. "Them again?" Ling Han said, a cold look in his eyes. This was the same as what had happened at the Chaotic Star's Majestic Empire. Zhao Luan had lodged a false accusation against him, and he had been put on a public trial by the army. Fortunately, the Empress had issued a decree that exonerated him. In fact, she had even seized the opportunity to execute a bunch of corrupt officials. However, due to the sensitivity of Zhao Luan's status, even the Empress hadn't dealt with him. This was partly because the matter hadn't been too serious. Moreover, there hadn't been a relationship between Ling Han and the Empress at that time. If such an event were to occur now, the Empress would probably deal with Zhao Luan swiftly and mercilessly. If Great General Zhao dared to oppose her, she would execute him along with his son. It wasn't as if she hadn't executed heavenly body tier generals before. However, this was the Majestic Heaven sect, and the Empress' influence couldn't reach this far. Even if she came over to help Ling Han, there was still a mountain-esque Eternal River tier elite keeping watch over the sect. Who in this galaxy could challenge an Eternal River tier elite? Ling Han humphed and said, They're twisting the truth and completely fabricating stories. How shameless. He had obtained the 4 drops of thousand source true fluid himself, and this was a fact that many people knew. Regarding the people from the Gao faction, it was Shi Ming who had chosen to unleash power at the Sun Moon tier. However, his action had led to him being attacked and killed by the restriction of the Mystery Realm. Meanwhile, the other members of the group had been killed by the rain of blood and bones that had formed when Shi Ming exploded and died. He hadn't laid a single finger on them. Yet, they had put all of these deaths on his head. Gao Huang is such a shameless person. There was a cold glint in Ling Han's eyes. He had come across shameless people before, yet he had never come across someone as shameless and flagrant as Gao Huang. He had forcefully twisted the truth to fit his own narrative. Right now, the problem is that everyone in the sect is talking about how you massacred fellow disciples and stole their 1000 source true fluid, Shui Yinyu said anxiously. Ling Han shook his head and said, "There's no need to worry about the matter regarding the 1000 source true fluid. A great deal of people witnessed me obtaining it. Anyhow, who's willing to believe that the Gao faction can obtain 4 drops of 1000 source true fluid all by themselves?" Shui Yinyu nodded in realization. She had been extremely worried, so she hadn't been able to analyze the situation as calmly and clearly as Ling Han. The more pressing issue is the death of Shi Ming and the others. Ling Han rubbed his chin and continued, "After all, no one witnessed that battle. Even if someone did witness it, it's extremely likely that they're not a disciple of the Majestic Heaven sect. Thus, it's even more unlikely that they'll step forward to act as a witness for me." This was a vast galaxy with billions upon billions of people, so where would they find a witness if there was even one? Moreover, witnesses could be bought off. In terms of wealth, Ling Han was definitely no match for the entire Gao faction that had the support of a heavenly body tier elite. Although Shui Yinyu and Hu Feiyun had also witnessed the battle, they had extremely close relationships with Ling Han. Thus, even if they offered witness statements, they would merely be dismissed as biased toward Ling Han. Anyhow, being as shameless as Gao Huang is, he'll probably find a few people to pose as witnesses. They'll claim that they personally saw me killing those Gao faction members. Ling Han speculated what kinds of methods Gao Huang might use. "What can we do?" Shui Yinyu asked anxiously. This was the Majestic Heaven sect, so the Gao faction was definitely very influential. Ling Han pondered for a moment before saying, "Even the Gao faction can't shut out the heavens with one hand. This is the Majestic Heaven sect, after all, not the Gao faction. However, whether or not this matter can be resolved depends on whether the other 8 factions are willing to weigh in on it. It also depends on Venerable Trinity's attitude." Shui Yinyu composed herself and also started to analyze the situation, saying, "Venerable Trinity has 9 disciples in total, and each has their own faction. Out of the other 8 factions, there are definitely a few that are hostile to the Gao faction. We don't need all of them, and we'll be able to resist the Gao faction if just one of them is willing to help." "Correct. However, why should they help us? What's in it for them?" Ling Han smiled and said, "They're not my wives, so they're not always thinking about what's in my best interests." He pulled Shui Yinyu into an embrace. He had been busy with cultivation and comprehension these past few days, so he hadn't had a chance to show love to this bewitching beauty. Now that her soft and shapely body was pressed against him, he couldn't help but feel aroused. Shui Yinyu felt a little annoyed, and she naturally blamed Ling Han for being so heartless. He had ignored her for an entire fortnight. However, he had actually become aroused at this moment. She truly didn't know what to say. "Come, it's only right that we discuss important matters in bed." After some passionate lovemaking, Ling Han embraced Shui Yinyu in satisfaction and said, "Everyone knows that I obtained a few drops of 1000 source true fluid. If I want to seek help from any of the other factions, they'll probably ask for 1000 source true fluid in return." Shui Yinyu nodded and said, "Gao Huang is probably trying to force you into submission as well. He wants you to willingly hand him the 1000 source true fluid." Even though I've got yet to meet him, his actions reveal that he's a cold-blooded person. He doesn't give a toss about his subordinates' lives, as long as they can fulfill his goals. Ling Han humphed and said, right now, he's stuck at the peak stage of the Sun-Moon tier. If he doesn't obtain any thousand source true fluid, he might need over 1,000,000 years to reach the heavenly body tier. In fact, there's a possibility that he'll be stuck at the Sun-Moon tier forever. So, he'll definitely do everything he can to snatch your thousand source true fluid. Shui Yinyu exclaimed in astonishment. Ling Han chuckled coldly and said, he's truly a wild dog. I'll need to up my guard, or it really will be troublesome if I'm bitten by him. Can't he wait for next time? Shui Yinyu asked in irritation. Ling Han shook his head and said, how can a despicable person like him keep his calm after seeing 4 drops of thousand source true fluid placed in front of him? Moreover, even though I'm a seed, I've come to the immortal realm from a small world. In other words, I'm the easiest to pick on. The other 5 king tiers had each obtained a drop of thousand source true fluid as well, meaning Gao Huang would be able to obtain another 5 drops if he were able to force all of them to give their drop up. This would be more than what Ling Han had. 9 drops of thousand source true fluid was better than 4, right? It would definitely increase his chance of breaking through to the heavenly body tier. So, why didn't he target Shinjuer and the others? This was because their background was too powerful. Gao Huang was merely afraid of offending them. But doesn't the Empress hold you in high regard? Shui Yinyu asked. She struggled to come up with words to describe their relationship. The relationship between Ling Han and the Empress was very fuzzy, after all. Although the Empress helped me before, everyone thought that she had left a spiritual mark on the 9th King's body. They thought that the 9th King had asked her for help, Ling Han said. This made a world of difference. If the heavenly body tier elite didn't want to help Ling Han, Gao Huang would only have to face the 9th King. If that were the case, what would he need to be afraid of? Even if they did want to help, they would both have heavenly body tier elites supporting them. Moreover, it was clear that Gao Feng, who had an eternal river tier master, was more impressive. So you're saying that we have to deal with this ourselves? Shui Yinyu asked uneasily. Ling Han nodded and then said, don't worry, if they truly piss me off, I'll chuck Notionless Saint out. Although he's lost his saintly might, he was once a saint, after all. Using him to frighten people should be fine. Shui Yinyu nodded and finally felt a little more at ease. However, Ling Han knew that he wouldn't be able to use Notionless Saint. He had already refined his own saintly might for his future disciple, so how could he deter Eternal River tier elites? In fact, could he even deter Heavenly Body tier elites? He had only said this to reassure Shui Yinyu. Chapter 1201, Conflict. Chapter 1201, Conflict. Ling Han decided to roll with the punches. Although the sect was flooded with rumors that demonized him, those who were objective and intelligent would be able to see through them easily. Ling Han believed that those who were talented enough to enter the Majestic Heaven sect were all relatively smart people. Thus, such rumors would eventually run out of steam. He still went to the Mo clan establishment as planned, and he sold them a large number of alchemical pills. He also made a copy of a pill recipe. It was an ancient recipe, and it was very likely that it was already lost in the outside world. Thus, he could probably sell it for a good price. Regarding the 1000 source true fluid, he decided to sell it as well. Don't you really want these, Gao Huang? Well, I'm not going to give them to you, and I'm even going to make you lose face. Ling Han genuinely didn't need these 4 drops of 1000 source true fluid. They could aid one's comprehension, but they couldn't increase one's cultivation level. Cultivating under the reincarnation tree couldn't improve one's comprehension, but this could be made up for with time. Perhaps 1 or 2 days of comprehension wouldn't be enough, but what about 8 or 10 years of comprehension? In a sense, the reincarnation tree had similar effects to 1000 source true fluid. Moreover, its beneficial effects could be used endlessly. Thus, Ling Han naturally wanted to sell his 4 drops of 1000 source true fluid. That way, he could increase his wealth and purchase more godly metal to raise the grade of his divine demon sword. Anyhow, Ling Han was destined to be a poor sod before he evolved the material of his divine demon sword to divine metal. All of his money would be spent on the divine demon sword. However, The might of his divine demon sword was already starting to show itself. It possessed a battle prowess that was no weaker than his. No matter how much he spent, this sword was worth the cost. Hanhua was stunned upon hearing Ling Han's offer. He then happily agreed and started to discuss the fine details with him. He decided to hold an auction, and the items for auction were naturally the 1000-source true fluid, ancient pill recipe, and alchemical pills that Ling Han provided. 1000-source true fluid and ancient pill recipes were all very valuable items, and thus it made sense to maximize their selling price by holding an auction. As for alchemical pills, they would definitely sell for more thanks to the influence of the other more valuable items. Those who did business were indeed more skilled at these kinds of things. Hanhua had taken far more things into consideration than Ling Han. Ling Han nodded in approval and let Hanhua deal with the remaining matters. Meanwhile, he returned to the majestic Heaven sect. He still had to practice the star-plucking step and study the new pill recipes. He arrived at his palace, only to see the old ginseng talking and joking with Li Weiwei and Ji Yuner. He was massaging their shoulders, and a strand of his roots stealthily slid into each of their collars, looking for beautiful landmarks. This perverted ginseng is beyond help. Although you're in a humanoid form, you're only as large a child's arm. What can you do? Ling Han shook his head as he thought this. Anyhow, what had Li Weiwei and Ji Yuner come for? Damn blockhead. You actually dared to keep me in the dark. Li Weiwei immediately jumped to her feet upon seeing Ling Han enter. This caused the old ginseng to grimace in pain. One of his roots had been on her chest, and he hadn't been able to pull it back in time. Thus, it was ruthlessly snapped when she jumped up. Li Weiwei didn't realize it, yet Ling Han saw it clearly. He secretly smiled to himself. Who told the old ginseng to act so perverted? Anyhow, this root would be good compensation for Li Weiwei. The roots of this old ginseng were extremely nutritious. Ling Han had only taken one to eat, and he had left the others stored on the old ginseng. Li Weiwei had unknowingly obtained one now, and it would definitely be extremely beneficial to her cultivation and physique. Ling Han smiled and said, "How did you find out?" Hee, I didn't believe that Sister Shui was the type of person who'd cheat. So, I kept pestering the Ninth King with questions. It didn't take long for her to spill the beans, Li Weiwei said smugly. Sure enough, Hu Feiyun couldn't keep any secrets. She was a clone of Empress Luan Xing, and her personality was one that was severed from the Empress. Thus, it was inevitable that there would be some deficiencies in her personality. Meanwhile, some of her other traits would be magnified significantly. For example, the innocence and ditziness of Hu Feiyun were both traits that had been severed from Empress Luan Xing. These had only been a tiny portion of the Empress personality, yet they were the entirety of Hu Feiyun's. Blockhead, how are you planning to respond? Everyone's talking about how you killed fellow disciples and stole their treasures. Li Weiwei quickly moved on from how Ling Han had kept his identity hidden and instead started to worry for him. Ling Han smiled and said, "It's fine. I'll deal with whatever gets thrown my way. What can I deal with?" What a bold claim, Li Weiwei said with a humph. However, she felt much more reassured after seeing Ling Han's oozing confidence. Ling Han had come from the chaotic star's majestic empire, after all, and he had come across all kinds of dangers. However, he had overcome all of them. Feng Piyun, Ding Ping, and the others also came to visit him. However, they were all reassured and sent away by Ling Han. He would deal with this matter himself. However, he couldn't find any time to cultivate in the following several days, with Xiao Sisi, Xiao Wuk, Su Jing, and the others all visiting him. They all hinted at their willingness to help him as long as he joined their forces. If he agreed to join, they would do everything in their ability to help him. Ling Han smiled and turned down their goodwill. He had no plans to join any forces. Why was he cultivating so earnestly? Wasn't it to attain true freedom so he could do what he wanted? Afterward, He Tao and the other king tiers also came to visit him. Their offers were similar to those of Xiao Sisi and the others, and they all hoped that Ling Han could join their forces. A significant reason for this was Ling Han's non-existent background. He had come from a small world after opening the sky, and thus he had absolutely no background in the immortal realm. As such, they didn't need to worry about him being a spy for some other force. Ling Han naturally turned down their offers as well. It was also around this time that a piece of news suddenly started to spread. The sect was apparently discussing the matter regarding Ling Han killing his fellow disciples. There was potentially going to be a public trial in a few days. Gao Huang was finally making his move. On the same night that this news broke, a Sun Moon tier elite appeared before Ling Han's palace. "I'm Zhou Tong." This Sun Moon tier elite looked to be around 30 years old, and it was clear that he had already formed 2 suns and moons. His strength was fairly formidable. There was a haughty look on his face, and he said, "I've come at the command of young master to give you one final chance. Immediately hand the 4 drops of 1000 source true fluid over. Otherwise, you'll become an unforgivable traitor of the sect. You'll be pinned to the post of humiliation forever." Ling Han smiled and said, "You could have chosen to be a respectable Sun Moon tier elite, but no, you had to choose the life of a dog. How dare you?" Zhou Tong exploded in rage, and divine flames instantly erupted from his body. Ling Han waved his hand and said, "Don't get all angry at me. You've merely cultivated for a few 100,000 years more than me. You want to make a bet? I'll be powerful enough to crush you in 10 years' time." Ling Han's words were extremely bold and domineering. A mountain river tier cultivator was claiming that they would possess the ability to crush a Sun Moon tier elite in 10 years' time. Who could believe this? However, Zhou Tong's pupils contracted when he heard this. Judging by the freakish nature of this brat, it was genuinely possible that he could achieve this. Anyhow, he didn't believe this claim too much. He humphed and said, "If you don't hand the 1000 source true fluid over, you won't even be able to overcome the challenge before you. That being the case, what future is there for you to speak of?" Ling Han smiled calmly. He had the pill recipe for the Berserk Blood Spirit pill, and he also had a Red Rain Divine King tree in his Black Tower. Thus, he would be able to refine a great deal of Berserk Blood Spirit pills once he reached the Sun Moon tier. One could envisage that he would improve in leaps and bounds during a certain period of time. "Go back and tell Gao Huang that if he wants my 1000 source true fluid, he can prepare enough true origin stones and attend the auction that occurs in 3 months' time," Ling Han said. This was a good opportunity to advertise the auction. Chapter 1202. The Hua Faction Makes Their Move. Chapter 1202. The Hua Faction Makes Their Move. Zhou Tong left, bringing with him fury and Ling Han's answer. As a great elite of Sun Moon tier, he was actually threatened up front by a mountain river tier. This made him very displeased. But who asked him to come up himself and offer himself up to be insulted? If he reported this to the sect, it would only be disadvantageous to him. As long as Ling Han was a seed, he was not someone that could be lightly insulted. The news that the Mo clan establishment would be auctioning off the 1000 source true fluid very soon caused a commotion, and this auction had also obtained the full support of the Mo clan. They had mobilized the full power of the clan to advertise this matter. Thus, very soon, the news had spread all over the entire galaxy. Even a great many elites of heavenly body tier were attracted. The 1000 source true fluid was formed from an elite of the eternal river tier, containing comprehension of the heaven and earth of this level. Even for heavenly body tiers, this was a precious treasure. It might not be able to make a cultivator at the peak stage of the heavenly body tier break through to the eternal river tier, but it was still very possible for it to help one in the low extreme of the heavenly body tier to break through to the medium extreme, or one in the medium extreme to advance into the high extreme, and so on. And what did this kind of advancement mean? A revolutionary change would take place in one's abilities, and his lifespan would also be increased by another 10 million years. 10 million years. With such a long period of time, perhaps he could obtain a new fated opportunity and advance into a higher cultivation level. Thus, not only Sun-Moon tiers were moved, even a great many heavenly body tiers had begun to set out towards Flying Cloud Planet. This was also the reason why the auction was scheduled for 3 months later. It was to allow enough time for the bankrollers to come. Of course, the Mo clan had also invited some alchemists. This group was the true rich group. For the sake of an ancient pill recipe, they would definitely place a high bid that would make one gape in shock. Ling Han did not need to do anything. He had already delegated the full responsibility for arranging the auction to Han Hua. He would only have to hand over the 1,000 source true fluid and other items over to Han Hua on the day of the auction, did not hand them over yet, because the goods would be safest with Ling Han. Because of how valuable the 1,000 source true fluid was, the auction had instantly become the hottest topic of conversation. However, the movement from the Gao faction was also getting bigger and bigger. Obviously, they were planning to subdue Ling Han before the auction itself. Otherwise, if the goods were already on the stage of the auction, they could only compete with their wealth. However, the majestic Heaven sect was not a place that the Gao faction had full control of. Senior Brother Han. On this night, a guest came to pay him a visit. Fan Ru led the guest in. She was an enchanting and exquisite beauty, with a voluptuous figure and so bewitching that she could have been dripping water. She curtsied to Ling Han and said, "I am Ji Yunji. Junior sister Ji. What is it?" Ling Han asked casually as if he had completely not realized that the person standing in front of him was a vixen that could make anyone's heart throb and face blush. Fan Ru, who was standing on the sidelines, dared not look directly at Ji Yunji, afraid that even his spirit would be hooked. Ji Yunji was surprised. She was naturally very clear how enchanting she was. This was not only because she was naturally beautiful, and had also deliberately gone the route of becoming more seductive later. It was also because the cultivation technique she was cultivating would allow her to be even more dazzling and bewitching. Every move she made would be exuding seduction. But Ling Han actually did not even look at her directly, which was something she could not accept. Usually, men would want nothing more than to have their eyes glued to her, but Ling Han was the complete opposite. He seemed too lazy to even cast a second look on her. She calmed herself and said, "I am here by command of Hua Yangwen, young Master Hua, hoping to ask for a small favor from Brother Ling and see if you could sell a drop of 1,000 source true fluid to the Hua faction." Hua faction? Ling Han gave an O. After he had made an enemy of the Gao faction, he had conducted his own investigation and knew that there was a disciple called Hua Yongning who was ranked 6th among Venerable Trinity's 9 disciples. Then this Hua faction was naturally formed by Hua Yongning. Additionally, Gao Fong was ranked 4th among the 9 disciples. Though this was only in the order in which they took him as master, in a certain way, it was also the power ranking of their respective factions. Young master would definitely not allow senior brother Ling to make a loss. Ji Yunji smiled sweetly. What young master means is, senior brother Ling needs only auction off 3 drops of 1,000 source true fluid, and young master would purchase a drop at the same price as the lowest successful bid among these 3 drops. This indeed could not be considered a loss to Ling Han, because if the 4 drops of 1,000 source true fluid were really auctioned off together, then the cheapest drop might be sold lower than the lowest successful bid in the case of 3 drops being auctioned off together. After all, the smaller the supply, the fiercer the competition would be. For my sake, the Hua faction would turn hostile with the Gao faction? Ling Han asked. Any faction is filled with competition. As the saying goes, the weak are prey to the strong, and survival of the fittest reigns supreme, Ji Yunji said calmly. Among the Venerable's 9 disciples, only one would be able to obtain the final true inheritance and shoulder the great responsibility of leading the majestic Heaven sect. So, even if it is not for the sake of senior brother Han, the battle between the Hua faction and Gao faction is inevitable. Ling Han nodded. The lower ranks had their own competition, and the upper ranks would also have the struggle of the upper ranks. How much envy would the inheritance of eternal river Tear garner? If one obtained it, he might perhaps be capable of conquering this whole universe and become the only ruler. How many people would be able to resist this kind of temptation? No wonder those 9 disciples all formed their respective factions. Their aim was to increase their own stakes so they could obtain the inheritance. However, Venerable Trinity had not made his stand clear all this while, and even had plans to take Yang Hao as his 10th disciple. This was actually giving off the signal that Venerable Trinity was not very satisfied with these 9 disciples. Even though the 9 disciples were all fighting fiercely now, when the time came, it could be completely wasted effort, and they wouldn't be getting anything. Ling Han smiled. What relation did this have with him? He pondered for a moment, and then said, "All right. I can retain a drop of 1,000 source true fluid for young Master Hua." In any case, it was no loss to him. Senior Brother Han is truly a man of firm temperament. I shall first offer my thanks on behalf of young Master. Ji Yunji stood up and curtsied again to Ling Han. Her head and neck was low, revealing the snow white of her breasts. The part that swelled was voluptuous and grand. What a seductive beauty that could ignite flames. Ling Han's expression was serene. Constantly being seduced by a great vixen like Shui Yinyu, he had naturally gained a strong immunity. Furthermore, in comparison with the exquisite beauty and charm of Empress Luan Xing, Ji Yunji was only on the level of a village girl. How could he possibly be disturbed? Ji Yunji raised her head, and when she saw that Ling Han's expression was calm, without the slightest sign of his heart beating faster or being breathless in excitement, she couldn't help but feel extremely curious. According to her understanding, Ling Han should have reacted by now and embarrassed himself and become obedient in front of her. Then she would be able to get the upper hand psychologically. If she then set out some conditions, Ling Han would agree without the slightest hesitation due to his flustered state. Did this guy not like women? Ji Yunji was making her guesses internally, but it was naturally impossible that she would ask this question out loud. She continued talking and took advantage of the opportunity to seduce Ling Han a few more times, but all her attempts ended in failure. Thus, she could only leave helplessly. What nice breasts! Old ginseng popped up from who knew where, looking like it was gritting its teeth at Ling Han. That little asterisk was obviously seducing you. So why didn't you just take her? Even if you wouldn't, you should still have had her take off her clothes so you could allow this grandpa ginseng to have an eyeful. Get lost. Ling Han shot out a kick. This perverted ginseng was definitely incurable. Chapter 1203, Turning Hostile. Chapter 1203, Turning Hostile. The Hua faction had great power. From the second day onwards, there were already people talking about the truth on the Eagle's Beak Mountain, about how Ling Han had obtained 4 drops of 1,000 source true fluid all by himself and created history. In truth, this was something that had been talked about long ago, but it had immediately been buried underneath the public opinion that was universally against Ling Han. However, now with the Hua faction moving, it was like how the Gao faction had easily presented Ling Han as an executioner who killed others to steal their treasure, having as much impact on the people as the previous rumor. The vast power of the Hua faction was naturally not something that could be matched by any individual entity. Even when such young king tiers like He Tao and Shinjuer spoke up, it was useless. How could they match the force that had been nurtured for tens of thousands of years by the Hua faction and Gao faction? Now that the Hua faction and Gao faction had started their contention, it was naturally impossible that the public opinion would be so one-sided anymore. Instead, it was the clash of two voices. One was smearing Ling Han's reputation, whereas the other was establishing a positive image of Ling Han. What the truth was actually not important. What was important was which of these two factions was stronger. Unexpectedly, a new faction very soon joined in. The Hu faction. The founder of the Hu faction was the 9th disciple of the Venerable Trinity. His name was Hu Xiangdi. He did not have any children, and the young master of the Hu faction was his only disciple. Her name was Lei Linglong, an outstanding beauty. The Hu faction's inclination was to beat down on Ling Han. Actually, by now, Ling Han's matter was no longer important. This had become a stage for the disciples of the Venerable Trinity to show off their power. They were all fighting over the only qualification to obtain the true inheritance, and all wanted to trample over the others. Or in other words, they were making use of this matter to kick a few people out of their way. Ling Han was a fuse, and the joining in of the Hua faction had announced the beginning of this battle. Next, more disciples of the Venerable Trinity joined in. The Tai faction, Lang faction, Nye faction, Jin faction, Lu faction. Out of the 9 great disciple, 8 disciples had already joined in, and now the situation just happened to be 4 against 4. Now, it was the only remaining Chu faction that had yet to make their position clear. Who would have thought that a mere mountain river tier disciple would actually be capable of triggering a fierce battle among the 9 great disciples, and that they would display their respective abilities? But the Hua faction's condition had also changed. Previously, the condition that Ji Yunji had set out on behalf of the Hua faction was being willing to spend an exorbitant amount to purchase a drop of 1,000 source true fluid, and in exchange, they would help Ling Han dissolve the oppression from the Gao faction. But when the Tai faction, Nye faction, and Lu faction also joined into the alliance, Ji Yunji came to see Ling Han again. Apologies. To oppose the alliance of the Gao, Lang, Jiang, and Hu factions, young master was forced to pull in the other 3 factions for help, but they could not possibly offer their aid for no reason. Ji Yunji smiled apologetically. Young master said that we hoped that senior brother Han could take out all 4 drops of 1,000 source true fluid. Seeing Ling Han's expression darken, she hurriedly continued, naturally, young master would not treat senior brother Han badly. We can purchase it at 1 million true origin stones per drop. Are you committing burglary? Ling Han almost laughed out loud. Previously, when he had been selling alchemical pills at the Chaotic Star's Majestic Empire, he had earned more than 2 million true origin stones, and now, a drop of 1,000 source true fluid could actually only sell for 1 million. This was a treasure that even heavenly body tiers would prize greatly. Your young master is a real joker. Ling Han shook his head. He finally understood. What Hua faction and Gao faction? In truth, they were no different, it was just a dogfight. And he had actually placed his hopes on the Hua faction. He had really been too naive. Ji Yunji was also feeling guilty, but how could she possibly not do as young master commanded? She stretched out a hand to press down on Ling Han's palm and said, Senior brother Han, young master Hua will use other means to compensate you. Ling Han withdrew his hand and said, Hee, please keep a respectable distance, junior sister Ji. I, too, shall offer you a word of advice. A man that can treat you like an item to be freely gifted, would he really be worth entrusting your whole life to? Ji Yunji's beautiful face couldn't help but shift expressions drastically. Hua Yongwen had commanded that she could sacrifice some of her charms as the situation required to placate Ling Han. In her heart, she was naturally unwilling, but she dared not disobey his command. Now that Ling Han had pointed it out openly, she almost wanted to die in her fury and shame. There is no need for senior brother Han to worry about my matters, she said coldly. Just one word. If you hand over the 1,000 source true fluid, you can obtain me. Undress, undress, undress. Old Ginseng suddenly popped out. This guy's eyes was already shining brightly. When he heard such seductive words, how could he possibly continue resisting? He had scrambled out from who knows where. Girl, take off your clothes first, and let Grandpa Ginseng examine you. Get lost. Ling Han shot out a foot, and old Ginseng was instantly sent flying. Ah, old Ginseng screamed out. Brat, you are kicking me to the curb when I'm no longer useful. You are having the lion's share, so can't you save some scraps for Grandpa Ginseng? A man cannot be so disloyal. You petty brat. You hide all the good stuff for yourself. Grandpa Ginseng *** you. A muscle twitched involuntarily in Ji Yunji's cheek. And what the heck was this? Ling Han waved his hand dismissively and said, Go back, and you won't have to come again in future. Since young Master Hua is insincere, then our previous agreement will be completely considered nullified. Senior brother Han. A sinister expression appeared on Ji Yunji's face. Since you have already offended the Gao faction, if you continue to offend our Hua faction, you would progress with great difficulty within the sect. Hee, you speak as if the whole world belongs to you guys, Ling Han said carelessly. If you speak a few less words now, I will only detest the Hua faction at most. But if you continue to garner my dislike, the Hua faction will also be on my list of future targets. I can also offer you a warning. Those listed on my list of targets definitely will not reap any nice fruits. A confident smile appeared on his face. There would be a day when he would stride over the heavenly body tier to become eternal river tier, and by then, even if Venerable Trinity moved, he would not be able to stop him from seeking justice from the so-called Gao faction and Hua faction. He, the Rain Emperor, Feng Piyun, Ding Ping, Which one of them was not a genius in his own right? As long as they were given enough time, they would even be able to punch a hole in the heavens. They should not take unfair advantage of him just because of his youth. Ji Yunji couldn't help but yield in the face of Ling Han's forcefulness. After a long while, she finally said, "Since senior brother Han is obstinately clinging to his own course, I will report this to young master as it is." "Excuse me." She turned and left. Since their negotiation had soured, there was naturally nothing else that needed to be said. It would only cause their relations to become even worse. "Brat, you were practically too stupid. Since there was a girl that willingly offered to take off her clothes, why didn't you just go ahead?" Old Ginseng ran back, a perverted expression all over his face. Ling Han sighed and said, "You have really reincarnated into the wrong body. Since you love to watch people undress so much, why don't you go and stay at the public baths?" Hee hee. The old Ginseng released a series of mischievous snicker. "How do you know that Grandpa Ginseng hasn't gone there?" "Fuck, this perverted Ginseng." Ling Han shook his head, too lazy to squabble with him. Now that he had also pushed out the Hua faction, then even if the Hua faction and the other factions did not fall in with the Gao faction, there were still as many as 4 factions targeting Ling Han. Now that things had come so far, the arrow was already notched. No matter if Ling Han had committed a crime or not, they would all have to crucify Ling Han. Otherwise, the 4 factions would all lose face. One Gao faction was already capable of suppressing Ling Han to the point of suffocation. What more when there were now 4 factions? Chapter 1204, Day of the Auction. Chapter 1204, Day of the Auction. There were still 47 days until the auction. Obviously, the Gao faction would definitely not allow the auction to proceed, because once the 1000-source true fluid had been auctioned off, the buyer would either be an elite of the heavenly body tier or a force that had the backing of one. No ordinary person would have that kind of wealth. And in the face of elites of the heavenly body tier, the Gao faction would firstly be too embarrassed to try to snatch the treasure, and secondly, they might not be successful either, unless Venerable Trinity moved personally. But if Venerable Trinity had been willing to move, there wouldn't have been an auction in the first place. Hence, the Gao faction would definitely have to rush against time to deal with Ling Han before the auction started. In that case, the 1000-source true fluid would be theirs. As for how the 4 drops of 1000-source true fluid were to be divided, and how Ling Han would be finally dealt with, that was their internal business. In short, they had to first snatch the 1000-source true fluid. These few days, I have already discovered that there are people keeping a surveillance in secret. Looks like the Gao faction is finally going to make a true killing move. No need for a few days, and the sect would put me on trial. Though this seems like farce to me, this is a world where only the strong rule in the first place. Now that the Hua faction has shrunk back, unless Venerable Trinity spoke up, this battle would not be easily fought. Ling Han was pondering deeply. Even he had not foreseen that things would have progressed to this level. At the time, he had only given his full effort in battle just for the sake of safeguarding his own treasure. He had not predicted that this would have given the Gao faction an opening to raise difficult questions and place the deaths of Shi Ming and the others on his account as well. Though this matter was indeed slightly related to him, it had been the Gao faction provoking him in the first place. It couldn't possibly be that since you were about to rob me, I would have to smilingly surrender my treasure, right? Then what was the point of cultivation? He might as well just become a coward. Though that's the fact, how should I actually survive this ordeal? Ling Han considered for a very long time, and finally came to a decision. No matter if it is the Gao faction or the Hua faction, what they want is the 1000-source true fluid. Then, from this day onwards, I will stay in the Black Tower and not come out. I will drag it out all the way until the day of the auction, when I will rid myself of the 1000-source true fluid. Then, the pressure I face would be considerably smaller. Perhaps only Gao Huang would be biting at me at that time like a mad dog. Ho ho, Gao Huang, though we have never met, you should be very honored to become the first person that I want to kill before even meeting him. Ling Han smirked coldly. He was forced so far that he could only stay in the Black Tower for his own safety. Naturally, he was furious. After sending Fan Ru off to Hu Feiyun's, Ling Han informed Ding Ping, Feng Piyun, Shui Yinyu, and the others, telling them not to come and look for him these few days. Then, he entered into the Black Tower and continued to cultivate the star-plucking step. However, 2 days later, the Gao faction could no longer bear it and used a killing move. They summoned Ling Han for a trial to investigate the truth behind the deaths of Shi Ming and the others. Yet Ling Han had disappeared. This move caught the Gao faction unprepared. They searched Ling Han's quarters thoroughly in the name of the sect rules, yet they still did not manage to find him. This drove them crazy. To prevent Ling Han from fleeing, they had already had people stand guard at the doors. As soon as Ling Han left, they would be putting him under surveillance. Yet the person who was on surveillance duty solemnly vowed that Ling Han had definitely not left the palace. But where was he now? How had he disappeared? Ling Han had not been sentenced yet. Thus, as a seed, he could naturally come and go as he pleased. This was not against the rules of the sect. Hence, the Gao faction could not treat Ling Han as a criminal and stick up wanted posters for him everywhere. This was extremely interesting. To list Ling Han as a wanted criminal, they had to first prove that he had committed a crime. Yet Ling Han did not appear, so the trial could not be carried out. Then, he was innocent, and this was a complete cycle. Thus, the Gao faction could only mobilize their own forces to search for Ling Han in secret. The other factions might also have joined in as well, but they ultimately could not command the whole sect and launch a search on a greater scale. Meanwhile, Ling Han was leisurely cultivating in the Black Tower. He had enough alchemical pills and true origin stones. Even if he was in the Black Tower, it did not affect his accumulation of origin power, and as he underwent comprehension underneath the reincarnation tree, it was natural that his grasp of the regulations of this heaven and earth would be greatly improved day by day. When the day that the auction would begin came, Ling Han quietly advanced into the peak stage of the pinnacle level of the Mountain River tier, and had become qualified to become a match for an opponent in the low extreme of the Sun Moon tier. "I have never been this powerful before," he murmured to himself. No wonder Shinjuer and the others had been so confident previously. If they had exhibited their full power, they could have indeed suppressed him easily. Of course, suppressing him was one matter, and wounding him was another. As for the star-plucking step, I have also grasped a bit of it. Cooperating with the present level of my origin power, I can definitely experience a short burst of speed that would surpass the majority of Sun Moon tiers. It's time to go to the auction. He exited the Black Tower, calmly opened the doors, and came out. Pooh! Seeing him suddenly appear, the eyes of the person in charge of surveillance outside almost popped out. Even his brain short-circuited. They were keeping a watch here, but it was merely routine business. After all, they had searched the palace a considerable number of times before. Who would have thought that Ling Han would actually come out from inside? When they saw Ling Han, they only felt as if they had seen a monster. Thus, it was only when Ling Han had walked quite some distance away that they came back to themselves and shouted, "Stop right there!" Ling Han smiled. "Just because you said so?" Not only did he not stop, he instead ran even faster. "Quick, send out a signal quickly. We've found Han Lin," one of the people on watch duty said. The other person nodded hurriedly and drew out a signal bomb. Pa, a Gao letter instantly appeared in the skies. This was the unique communication method of the Gao faction. Suddenly, elites of the Sun Moon tier appeared and quickly rushed over. Additionally, there were even more Mountain River tiers that had rushed here. However, they were much slower. When they found out that Ling Han had appeared, they were both pleased and shocked. Their pleasure was because Ling Han had finally appeared, and their shock was due to the fact that today was the day of the auction. This brat must be rushing to deliver the goods to the auction. Cut him off. Old you. We'll move separately. I will pursue by following the traces of that brat while you head directly for the auction, an elite of Sun Moon tier said. All right. The other person nodded. Two great elites of the Sun Moon tier were moving separately. They had absolute confidence that whichever of them moved, they would be able to easily subdue Ling Han. The one in pursuit of Ling Han was precisely Zhu Tianqiu. Previously, He had experienced a loss in Ling Han's hands in secret, so he would naturally bear a grudge against Ling Han. He wanted to apprehend Ling Han personally and put him in a little bit of suffering first. Zhu Tianqiu's speed was extremely fast. Though Ling Han circled and turned here and there, attempting to hide the traces, how powerful were the senses of the Sun Moon tier. He pursued him the whole way, and in a short while, he could already catch sight of Ling Han's back. "Ha ha ha ha, Han Lin, there is no way you can flee," he declared wickedly. "Ho ho, you are threatening me again. Have you forgotten the lesson from last time?" Ling Han asked smilingly. Zhu Tianqiu almost exploded in anger. This brat actually dared to still speak of the matter from previously? He released a furious roar, and his feet suddenly sped up as he raced towards Ling Han. "Brat, don't even think of running away this time." "That may not be the case." Ling Han sped up as well. Xiao, he burst into a terrifying speed, which was actually not the slightest bit slower than Zhu Tianqiu's. Star-plucking step. Chapter 1205, Failure? Chapter 1205, Failure? Zhu Tianqiu was astonished. Ling Han was merely in the mountain river tier, yet the burst of speed actually made him faster than even him. Was this possible? However, even if he didn't want to, he had to believe this. Not only did the gap between himself and Ling Han not shorten, it was instead widening endlessly. So fortunate, he thought. Previously, it had indeed been wise of him to have the other person stand guard to wait for Ling Han at the auction grounds. Otherwise, the two of them would only be able to sigh helplessly as they followed Ling Han fruitlessly. Yet Ling Han knew he would not be able to maintain such speed for long. This was a little like the ultimate arrow, though it was not as exaggerated. For a short time, he could burst with a terrifyingly fast speed, and he could maintain this kind of high speed more or less for about 6 or 7 minutes. And this was taking into account the fact that he had not completely grasped the star-plucking step. If he could completely understand the true essence of this movement technique, the burst of speed would be even greater. Soon enough, Ling Han's speed had decreased. However, he had already arrived at the foot of the mountain, and the small town had appeared in front of him. There was just a little bit of distance he had to cover. "Han Lin, will you still not halt?" A cold humph sounded, and a Sun Moon tier elite appeared, standing in Ling Han's path like a god descended. "Whether I halt or not, what relation does that have with you?" Ling Han's figure flashed, intending to make a turn and pass. "What a joke. You see, am standing guard here, and you still think you can pass?" This Sun Moon tier smirked coldly, stretching out a hand to grab Ling Han. He was in the late stage of the low extreme of the Sun Moon tier. As he delivered this attack, a sun and moon flickered, exuding a terrifying aura. This was not the Yellow Spring Mystery Realm, where there would be restrictions in place to target power above the level of Sun Moon tier. Ling Han clenched his fist and shot out a punch. "What? Are you planning to seek death?" Yu Si was internally surprised. A mere mountain river tier would actually dare oppose a Sun Moon tier. Where had he gotten such outlandish courage from? He gave a humph, yet still drew back some of his power to avoid killing Ling Han with a single blow. As long as his crime was not proved and he himself sentenced, Ling Han would be a seed of the majestic Heaven sect. Yu Si could only invite him back for the trial. If he crippled Ling Han or even killed him, then he would have to pay a corresponding price for his actions. A fist landed on the giant descending palm, and suddenly, a frightening shock wave was generated. Pong, 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 pong. The mountain rocks around them were all shattered by the force. An expression of disbelief appeared on Yu Si's face. Ling Han's punch actually blocked his attack. This. The peak stage of the pinnacle level. You have actually cultivated to the peak stage of the pinnacle level. His astonishment was indescribable. The pinnacle level belonged to the territory of king tiers, but even so, it was not every king tier that could cultivate to the peak of the pinnacle level. This was the pinnacle level, and in this cultivation level, every step forward was incredibly difficult to take. Just how old was Ling Han? Yet, he had already cultivated to the peak stage of the pinnacle level. Furthermore, the peak stage of the pinnacle level meant that his power could surpass a major tier. Presently, this brat's power was equivalent to that of the early stage of the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier. Yu Si was actually in the late stage of the low extreme, yet because he had feared killing Ling Han with a single strike, he had held back some of his power, causing the power on both sides to actually be more or less equal. Haha, no big deal. You do not have to admire me so much, Ling Han said, smiling. Humph, even if you are in the peak stage of the pinnacle level, so what? That is only equivalent to the early stage of the low extreme. I will still be able to easily suppress you. Yu Si said. That was good too. He could use his full abilities and needed not worry that he would mistakenly kill Ling Han, implicating himself as well. He used the power of the Sun-Moon tier, and all the divine patterns on his body lit up, exhibiting his full battle prowess. Brat, today I will let you know that the difference between Mountain River tier and Sun-Moon tier is not merely in terms of power, but also the grasp we have of the Tao of heaven and earth. Hong, he too, delivered a punch. The divine patterns interwove densely together, forming a terrifying might. Ling Han took it head-on, yet was immediately sent flying, blood gushing from all over his body. He got back up with gritted teeth. The other had spoken true. The Sun-Moon tier was not only stronger than Mountain River tier in terms of power, but also in the level of comprehension of the regulations of this heaven and earth. He had cultivated to the peak stage of the pinnacle level, and in theory was only inferior to his opponent by 2 stars of power, but added with the regulations of heaven and earth, this gap was extraordinarily wide. Why was it said that 10 stars of power would be able to match the early stage of the low extreme of Sun-Moon tier? That was because this kind of Sun-Moon tier had just crossed over into this new territory, and their comprehension of the regulations was more or less equivalent to the peak stage of the pinnacle level. Come with me back to the sect obediently to undergo the trial. Yu Si moved again. He opened his mouth and spat out a giant brown bird. The bird spread its wings and flew towards Ling Han. This was a giant beast. When its wings stretched out, they were 300 meters long, and it was completely covered with divine patterns. This was completely an attack that was formed from the regulations of heaven and earth. Ling Han did not take the attack forcefully. He had already tried, and the other's battle prowess was indeed superior to his. If he took it head-on, he would only be seeking his own suffering. He began to roam around in battle by using the star-plucking step. Though it no longer enabled him to have super speed, he could move in an erratic manner, which did not allow Yu Si to lock on him. Thus, his attack could not possibly exhibit the might that it should have had. Yu Si, however, was not impatient. Zhu Tianqiu should be able to arrive soon. The latter was in the peak stage of the low extreme. He would be able to take Ling Han down single-handedly, what more when joining forces with himself. He would only have to detain Ling Han and not allow the latter to go to the auction grounds. He was sure that Ling Han could not possibly have handed over a treasure like the 1,000 source true fluid to the Mo clan establishment ahead of time who would be able to do so without worrying. True enough, in a short while, Zhu Tianqiu had arrived. His burst of speed was indeed not as fast as Ling Han's, but its merit was that he could use that kind of speed for a long time. Thus, he had arrived only slightly later than Ling Han. Ha ha ha, let us see where else will you go. Zhu Tianqiu's face was slightly flushed. He, a powerful elite of the Sun-Moon tier, actually allowed a Mountain River tier to get away from him. How humiliating. Ling Han chuckled and said, "All right, I will follow you two back to the sect." Zhu Tianqiu and Yu Si suddenly felt uncomfortable, just like they had just thrown a punch into empty air. At first, they had wanted to properly create some difficulties for Ling Han, but who would have thought Ling Han would have been so decisive? However, since Ling Han had not been able to enter the town, he naturally couldn't have handed the 1,000 source true fluid over to the Mo clan establishment, and they could be considered to have successfully completed their mission. "Let's go then," the two said, their expressions dark. Ling Han did not look the slightest bit frustrated, causing Yu Si and his companion much confusion. Ling Han's plans had obviously failed, so why was he still so calm? They couldn't see through him. The trio headed towards the main peak. One elite of the Sun-Moon tier was walking in front and the other walking behind, with Ling Han sandwiched between them. They had condensed their origin power, but did not take any action. They would be able to burst out with the strongest blow at any moment to prevent Ling Han from running away. Yet Ling Han had completely no plans to flee. He smilingly asked, "Are you guys wondering why am I still so calm and serene now that I have completely failed and obviously not handed over the 1,000-source true fluid to the Emo clan establishment?" Both Yu Si and Zhu Tianqiu were internally baffled. This was indeed the source of their confusion. Yet these words had come so calmly and leisurely from Ling Han's mouth, giving them a very bizarre feeling. "Humph, since you know that you have completely failed, you should obediently hand over the 1,000-source true fluid. You have to know you are completely incapable of protecting so much divine fluid with your abilities," Yu Si declared coldly. Ling Han smiled slightly and said, "Haha, I know that you have placed my friends and disciple under surveillance. However, in truth, I am merely bait. Now that I have appeared, you would all come to chase after me. Haha, that disciple of mine should have already handed over the goods to the Emo clan establishment by now." Chapter 1206, Speaking Without Bounds. Chapter 1206, Speaking Without Bounds. "What?" Zhu Tianqiu and Yu Si almost jumped up in astonishment. Ling Han was only bait? Why were they targeting and chasing Ling Han? Although he had offended and disobeyed Gao Huang, this wasn't enough reason for the Gao faction to spend so much effort targeting him. The most important reason was the 4 drops of 1,000-source true fluid. However, he had actually handed these to the Emo clan establishment to auction. That being the case, what did it matter whether they captured Ling Han or not? They had been screwed over. "You look like you've eaten dead children," Ling Han said with a chuckle. "You have to understand that the 1,000-source true fluid was mine to begin with. Yet, you people are so worried about it now. Heh, should I thank you guys?" His voice was full of ridicule. He had handed the 1,000-source true fluid and other auction items to Ding Ping before he went into seclusion. Moreover, he had correctly guessed that the Gao faction would monitor the people close to him. Thus, he had used himself as bait to draw all of them over. It was only natural that they fell for his trick. Ling Han, their main target, had appeared, so shouldn't they pursue him? "You must be lying," Zhu Tianqiu roared. He had already been screwed over by Ling Han once. If he was screwed over again, he wouldn't be able to raise his head anymore. It would be far too humiliating. "That's right. You're definitely trying to scare us into hurrying back," Yu Si said. "That way, you'll be able to escape." Ling Han shrugged his shoulders and said, "Heh, only losers will stubbornly believe that they haven't lost yet. All right, it's time to leave. It's about time that this farce came to an end. I don't want to carry a non-existent accusation, even if it's only a suspicion." Zhu Tianqiu and Yu Si exchanged a glance. It was already too late to return to the Emo clan establishment. Their only option was to capture Ling Han and bring him back. That way, they would have at least accomplished their task. After a short while, they arrived at the White Jade Palace, which was located on the main peak. This palace was cut from flawless white jade. This was where the sect interrogated people and determined their innocence or guilt. After learning of Ling Han's return, several elites instantly hurried over. They would act as judges. There were 5 elites in total, and they were all at the peak stage of the Sun-Moon tier. Heavenly Body tier elites naturally wouldn't come to interrogate a measly Mountain River tier cultivator. After all, who had so much spare time? If this was the case for Heavenly Body tier elites, then it was obviously more so the case for Eternal River tier elites. Venerable Trinity spent almost all of his time cultivating. He barely ever came out of seclusion. However, were elites at the peak stage of the Sun-Moon tier not enough? Apart from the 1 Eternal River tier elite and 24 Heavenly Body tier elites, this was the most powerful force of the majestic Heaven sect. This was a force to be reckoned with, even when casting one's eyes over the entire galaxy. "Han Ling, are you not going to kneel before us?" one of the judges roared. He was called Shen Kuo, and he was the head of the 5 judges. Thus, he was naturally seated in the middle. Ling Han smiled calmly and said, "This disciple hasn't broken any sect rules, so what am I being accused of?" Moreover, I'm a seed, so I don't have to kneel before you. Am I correct? Heh, my respects to you, seniors. He clasped his hands in front of him and nodded at the 5 judges. This was his respectful greeting. What an arrogant brat, another Judge Mage exclaimed. His eyes were very narrow, and there was a strangely feminine feel about him. Youth, that which is too hard snaps easily. Those who are too arrogant never meet with good fate. Oh, are you talking about Yang Hao? Ling Han chuckled and said, he's indeed very arrogant. He's already at the Sun-Moon tier, yet he's still targeting cultivators at the Mountain River tier. He's ignoring the rules of the sect, yet he actually went unpunished even after causing such a great commotion. There's truly no justice. Pooh. The 5 judges almost exploded in rage. You're pretty fucking good at spewing sh*t, aren't you? Yang Hao was indeed very arrogant. However, he was a 1 in 1,000,000 years prodigy. In fact, there was even a chance that Venerable Trinity would choose him as his successor. Thus, he had the right to be arrogant. Moreover, hadn't Yang Hao been severely beaten by the Empress already? Even his life essence had started to drain, and his lifespan had decreased by at least several hundred years. Visit on our novel full. Although a few hundred years wasn't significant to heavenly body tier elites, it wasn't insignificant either. When they neared the end of their lifespan, even a period of a few hours would be extremely precious, let alone a period of several hundred years. Yang Hao hadn't caused a fuss after suffering this fate, yet Ling Han was standing here and taking jabs. Where was the justice? Xinhua coughed loudly and said, Han Lin, stop trying to deride others. The aim of this trial was to determine whether Ling Han was innocent or guilty. So, what reason was there to talk about others? His expression became cold, and he asked, do you understand your crime? Understand what crime? Ling Han retorted with a smile. During your time in the Yellow Spring Mystery Realm, you slaughtered the Gao faction Shi Ming as well as his companions. Not only that, but you even stole their 1000-source true fluid. Xinhua's voice was frosty, and he even unleashed his Sun-Moon tier aura toward Ling Han. Unfortunately for him, Ling Han's divine sense was extremely sturdy and tough thanks to the tempering from the indestructible Heaven Scroll. Moreover, he had even refined a remnant wisp of demonic power source. Thus, if one wanted to suppress his divine sense, they would need to be at least Genesis tier elites. As for Sun-Moon tier elites, they weren't powerful enough. Ling Han stood proudly and said, what Gao faction? I've never seen it before. In fact, I've never even heard of it. Utter drivel. Ma Gai humphed and said, if you don't have a guilty conscience, why did you disappear for several months and make it impossible for others to find you? You truly like to joke. Isn't it extremely normal for cultivators to cultivate in seclusion? Ling Han smiled and continued, perhaps you make a special report to the sect before you go into seclusion? Ma Gai was instantly rendered speechless. Of course, disciples could go into seclusion as they pleased. However, the timing of Ling Han's seclusion was far too coincidental to be an accident. No matter how one looked at it, it was clearly the action of a criminal escaping prosecution. Xinhua waved his hand and said, this is a fair and just trial to determine whether you're guilty or innocent. So, we still haven't used any instruments of torture on you yet. The sect definitely won't torture you into making a false admission. However, we won't allow criminals to lie their way out either. Senior is so just. Ling Han exclaimed with a smile. However, there was strong flavor of sarcasm in his voice. Xinhua really wanted to slap him to death. However, he could only suppress his urge upon thinking of Ling Han's identity as a seed. Anyhow, were it not for the fact that Ling Han had come from a small world and didn't have any background, how would they dare to target a seed? Which seed didn't have the support of heavenly body tier elites? The situation surrounding Ling Han, the Rain Emperor, and Ding Ping was extremely unique. 3 seed-level geniuses had actually come from the same small world. Xinhua composed himself and said, you're innocent for the time being. However, there's still a dispute regarding which party the 1000-source true fluid belongs to. So, I'll have to ask you to hand over the 1,000 source true fluid first. If it truly belongs to you, we'll naturally return it later. After saying so much, their true aim was still the 1,000 source true fluid. This was to be expected. If it were Ling Han alone, the Gao faction definitely wouldn't spend so much effort and resources. Ling Han laughed loudly and said, "Senior, are you trying to say that the 1,000 source true fluid was obtained by that crap faction, or whatever? Heh, you're quite the joker. How could those weaklings have obtained the 1,000 source true fluid? For drops, no less." "Oh, that's right. I heard that Yang Hao also obtained 2 drops before. If that crap faction obtained 4 drops, doesn't that mean that they're even more powerful than Yang Hao?" Weaklings. Shen Kuo and the other judges all winced upon hearing this. In reality, they were all members of the Gao faction. Although Ling Han hadn't called any names, he had effectively called all of them weaklings in his sweeping statement. He was a measly mountain river tier cultivator, yet he had pointed at their noses and called them weaklings? How could they accept this? What a toxic brat. Chapter 1207, Mastermind finally appears. Chapter 1207, Mastermind finally appears. Ling Han spread his hands with a smile and said, "To be honest with you, I've already handed the 1,000 source true fluid to the Mo clan establishment to auction. So, you can all stop thinking about it now. If you don't believe me, you can go out and ask around. Based on my understanding of you people, I trust that you already have people at the auction. In fact, it's about time that they report back. Go on, keep interrogating me. Although the innocent will remain innocent no matter what, there's always those who try to pour dirty water on others. I'm also extremely pissed off." Shen Kuo, Ma Gai, and the other judges all wore dark expressions. Did this brat really think that he was here as a guest? He was far too calm and composed. However, if what he said had been true, then they would really have been screwed over. They looked toward Zhu Tianqiu and Yu Si. Cold sweat instantly dripped down the 2 men's foreheads. If young master failed to obtain the 4 drops of 1,000 source true fluid, they would definitely have to shoulder a significant portion of the blame. The faces became as white as a sheet when they thought of Gao Huang's torture methods. It was as if they had become extremely sick. "Han Lin, what gall you have!" Shen Kuo roared in anger. "The ownership of the 1,000 source true fluid is still under dispute, yet you actually put it up for auction. Are you blatantly opposing the sect?" Ling Han smiled and said, "Stop spewing such utter nonsense. The 4 drops of 1,000 source true fluid are mine no matter how you want to paint the situation. If you don't believe me, you can ask all of the mountain river tier cultivators in the sect to attack me. That way, you'll see whether or not I'm able to defeat all of them by myself. No. Anyhow, your accusations are completely baseless. In fact, let's talk about Shi Ming and the others. Since you've accused me of killing them, where are your witnesses and physical evidence? They couldn't have told you in your dreams, right?" Pooh. A few ordinary disciples who were maintaining the order outside the palace instantly spluttered with laughter. However, this wasn't the public trial, so there was no one standing around and watching. Thus, these disciples barely had anything to do. Shen Kuo's expression became extremely dark. He had never dreamed that a day would come when he would almost explode in anger due to the words of a mountain river tier cultivator. After all, it was almost impossible for such a situation to occur. Which mountain river tier cultivator dared to speak back to Sun Moon tier elites? Moreover, what did it matter if they spoke back? If they did, the Sun Moon tier elites could simply smack them to death. What could the mountain river tier cultivators do about this? However, he truly couldn't smack Ling Han to death at this moment. First of all, he couldn't confirm whether the 1,000 source true fluid had truly been handed to the Mo clan establishment to auction. If he smacked Ling Han to death, and it turned out that he was hiding it somewhere, he could sit tight and wait for Gao Huang to kill him. Second of all, Ling Han was still a seed. As long as he retained this status, it would be beyond his authority to kill him. Thus, Shen Kuo could only suppress his anger. Pong! The door of the White Jade Palace was suddenly pushed open at this moment. In fact, it was probably kicked open. The person at the door was still in a kicking posture. This was a slender youth who appeared extremely handsome. However, a terrifying aura radiated from his body, and the pressure that it exuded caused many of the people present to have difficulty breathing. It was as if they were being choked. "Our respects to young master." Shinhua and the others immediately stood up and bowed respectfully to the youth. Meanwhile, the Mountain River Tier disciples instantly kneeled down in greeting. This person was Gao Huang. Ling Han turned around to look at this opponent he had never seen before. He needed to remember this person's appearance lest he accidentally killed the wrong person in the future. Gao Huang wore an angry expression as he strode into the hall. He humphed coldly and said, "What are you trash even doing? I received a report that a drop of 1,000 source true fluid has already been auctioned." The appearance of this drop meant that the remaining 3 drops were also in the hands of the Mo clan establishment. Shinhua and the others remained silent, just like cicadas in the cold. Although they were Sun Moon tier elites, they were like little children before Gao Huang. There was nothing they could do about this. Gao Huang wasn't weaker than them, and his status was far above theirs. Moreover, his father was an elite at the peak stage of the heavenly body tier. Who would dare to provoke him? In any case, they were all members of the Gao faction. So how would they dare to disrespect their young master? Gao Huang turned his gaze to Ling Han and said, "You immediately head to the auction house and stop the auction." "Oh, why should I?" Ling Han asked with a smile. "Because I command you to do so," Gao Huang said haughtily. "Dumb C***T. Ling Han snorted. "Why you dare to scold me?" Gao Huang shouted in fury. Ling Han shrugged his shoulders and said, "If you're not a dumb C***T, why did assume I was talking about you? If you are a dumb C***T, then I'm merely telling the truth. If telling the truth is equivalent to scolding, then I've really got nothing to say." Gao Huang instantly exploded in rage. He had never seen someone curse another person so righteously before. He humphed and said, "You're acting so arrogant even though you're in an interrogation hall. What a rare sight. However, don't forget where this is." What are you all standing there for? Continue the interrogation." Shinhua and the others all looked at each other. Hadn't they been interrogating Ling Han before? It was the sudden arrival of Gao Huang that had interrupted the trial. Yet, Gao Huang was actually blaming them. However, did they dare to grumble and complain? They weren't Ling Han, nor were they as courageous as him. "Han Lin, no matter how many excuses you come up with, you won't be able to escape the chains of justice." Shinhua returned to his seat before slamming the table and saying, "Invite the witnesses." It wasn't long before several people walked out from the back of the hall. They were all youthful disciples at the Mountain River Tier. "Did you witness Han Lin killing Ming and the others?" Shinhui asked. "We did, senior," the Mountain River Tier disciples said, nodding respectfully. Shinhua turned to Ling Han and asked, "Han Lin, do you have anything to say?" Ling Han laughed loudly, then pointed at one of the youths and said, "Let me ask you, what technique and weapon did I use to kill Ming?" The youth was rendered speechless. They hadn't prepared an answer to this. "What? You witnessed me killing them, yet you have no idea how I killed them?" Ling Han smiled and said, "Is there something wrong with your eyes? Hold it. Don't answer my question yet." Ling Han waved his hand at the youth, then turned to the other disciples and said, "Since you all witnessed me killing Ming, tell me together, what weapon did I use to kill him? There's no need to hurry. I'll count to 3, and you can all answer together." 1, 2. "Enough," Shinhua roared. "Han Lin, how long are you going to muck around for?" Ling Han was astonished, and he said, "Am I not proving my own innocence? Anyhow, this is a very simple question, is it not? Since they witnessed me killing them, isn't it well within my rights to ask them what technique and weapon I used?" "Humph, you're threatening the witnesses," Shinhua said sharply. How would I dare to threaten the witnesses before Sun Moon tier judges? I don't have the power to do that even if I wanted to." Ling Han's voice was calm, and he continued, "Then I may as well remain silent. Will that satisfy you, seniors?" What an argumentative person. There was a long laugh, and a person appeared before the door of the palace. No, there were two people, one in front and one behind. The person standing in front was a handsome youth, was no less handsome than Gao Huang. Moreover, his strength was likely no weaker, either. The aura that radiated from him was also suffocating. Ling Han didn't recognize this person. However, he immediately guessed his identity upon seeing that the person behind him was Ji Yunji. He was Hua Yangwan, the young master of the Hua faction. Chapter 1208, A Gathering of Villains. Chapter 1208, A Gathering of Villains. Hua Yangwan, why are you here? Gao Huang asked with a humph. Heh, this isn't your house, so why can't I be here? Hua Yangwan was naturally unafraid of Gao Huang. They were both descendants of disciples of an eternal river tier elite, and they were both the young master of their respective faction. Their status was identical, their cultivation level was identical, and their strength was also identical. Gao Huang stared at Hua Yangwan. He had already lost the 1000-source true fluid, so he was naturally beside himself with fury. Right now, he wanted to take his anger out on Ling Han. Thus, the worst thing that could happen was if someone stepped out to protect Ling Han. Hua Yangwan pointed at Ling Han and said, "Don't worry, I didn't come to protect him." Killing intent flashed across his eyes. Gao Huang instantly came to a realization. The Hua faction had evidently made a deal with Ling Han before, and it was because of this deal that they had helped him. The 1000-source true fluid had most likely been an integral part of this deal. Otherwise, why would Hua Yangwan have been so fervent? However, after a while, the Hua faction had suddenly stopped helping him. This was undoubtedly because their deal had fallen through. In other words, the Hua faction had given up on Ling Han. Thinking carefully, the Hua faction hadn't prevented them from listing Ling Han on the interrogation list. In fact, they had even encouraged this. From this, it could be seen that the Hua faction also wanted to capture Ling Han. It was just that they were hiding in the background and out of sight. In order to interrogate a seed, they needed support from over half of the 24 heavenly body tier elites. Thus, if the Hua faction wanted to protect Ling Han, they could have easily prevented him from entering the White Jade Palace. Of course, they would definitely have to pay a price for this. Anyhow, everyone had wanted to snatch the 1000-source true fluid from Ling Han's hands. It was just that the Gao faction had been the most active and fervent. If the Gao faction had succeeded in obtaining the 4 drops of 1000-source true fluid, the Hua faction, Hu faction, and other factions definitely wouldn't have sat on their hands. They would have all stepped in to take a slice of the cake. This was inevitable. After all, Ling Han was a soft target. Brilliant. It's fine as long as he's not here to protect Ling Han. Gao Huang nodded and said, "We already have all the witnesses and evidence, so hurry up and deliver the judgment. Strip him of his identity as a seed." Hua Yangwan wore a faint smile as he watched on. This measly mountain river tier cultivator had actually dared to reject him. How foolish. He had especially come here to witness Ling Han's suffering. He wanted to see his expression of anger and remorse. Ling Han looked at them coldly. This was a gathering of rats and snakes one, so it would be useless no matter how he explained himself. All he could do was speak a few words of ridicule. However, nothing he did would change the end result. Of course, this was unless a powerful elite stepped in to help him. However, such a possibility was incredibly slim. Ahem. There was an awkward expression on Shanqua's face. He was the main judge, yet he was being commanded like a dog by Gao Huang. He forced a serious expression onto his face and said, "Han Lin, there's irrefutable evidence that you killed your fellow disciples. I hereby announce that, from this moment on, you're stripped of your identity as a seed and stripped of your identity as a disciple of the majestic heaven sect." Pa! He slammed the table heavily. "You committed the abhorrent crime of killing fellow disciples. According to the rules of the sect." Ha 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 ha. Shenhua was just about to announce further punishment, yet Gao Huang had already started to laugh loudly. Gao Huang's laughter cut him off, and he could only shut his mouth awkwardly. "Han Lin, do you regret your decisions now?" Gao Huang's voice was cold, and he continued, "You're a measly mountain river tier cultivator. and you're more so a bumpkin from a small world. Yet, you actually dare to oppose me? Are you worthy? Do you have the right? I'm going to give you one final chance. Kneel down and beg me for forgiveness. Perhaps I'll be lenient and spare your life." Ling Han shook his head and said, "Gao Huang, you truly haven't disappointed me. You really are a cold and heartless person. Didn't you say that I killed Shiming? Yet, you'll actually spare me if I kneel down and kowtow to you. Aren't you afraid of alienating your subordinates?" Sure enough, the expressions of Shen Kuo and the others changed when they heard this. Gao Huang paid no heed to this. In his mind, apart from his father, other people were all lackeys and dogs that acted on his command. If they were disobedient, he would simply kill them. The most abundant resource in this world was lackeys. So, why did he need to care? He laughed loudly and said, "This is your only way to avoid death. Become my dog, and I'll spare your life." "Keep dreaming." Ling Han shook his head and said, "The only person who'll be kneeling and kowtowing is you." Preposterous. Gao Huang seethed. He truly didn't understand where Ling Han was getting his confidence from. He had already lost his identity as a seed, and he was a mere lamb for slaughter. Ling Han swept his gaze over Gao Huang and Hua Yangwan, and then said, "I've already remembered your appearances. It's best that you remember what happened today. I'll return within 10 years to repay this debt." He had already decided to enter the Black Tower and leave the majestic Heaven sect. After 10 years, he could perhaps become a heavenly body tier elite. At that time, he would return to exact revenge. He wasn't overly worried about Ding Ping, Shui Yinyu, and the others. After all, they were all disciples of the majestic Heaven sect. Even if Gao Huang wanted to target them, he would need to frame them first, just as he had done with Ling Han. However, timing and opportunities were integral when trying to frame someone. Ling Han wouldn't give them this chance. He had already discussed this with Shui Yinyu and the others, and they had all gathered at the Mo clan establishment today. If things went awry, they would immediately leave together. He was only one step away from reaching the Sun-Moon tier, so it was about time that he went to search for the Rock Palace, the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden, and the others. This was a decent opportunity to leave. Moreover, he had already asked the Mo clan establishment to help him search for the Rock Palace and the Five Sects. Once there was information, he would immediately set off. "Heh, you're still as arrogant as ever." Another voice traveled over, and a deity-like man walked into the palace. A long shadow was cast by his tall figure, and it was as if people could only kowtow under his shadows. It was Yang Hao. "Oh, our respects to Uncle Yang." Gao Huang and Hua Yangwan exchanged a glance before greeting Yang Hao respectfully. "What, Uncle Yang?" One had to realize that Gao Huang and Yang Hao were both at the peak stage of the Sun-Moon tier. Meanwhile, Yang Hao was only the high extreme of the Sun-Moon tier. So, why were they referring to him as a senior? Unless Uncle Yang officially became the 10th disciple of the Grandmaster yesterday, Gao Huang explained. He was someone who cared about face, so he naturally explained why he had referred to Yang Hao as Uncle Yang. Now that he had become the 10th disciple of the Venerable Trinity, Yang Hao's status had changed completely. Even though his cultivation level was still low, even heavenly body tier elites would have to treat him with the utmost respect. One could disrespect Yang Hao, but could they disrespect Venerable Trinity? If one held themselves in higher regard than Yang Hao, wouldn't they be claiming to be on the same level as Venerable Trinity? Who in this galaxy had the right to claim this? Everyone was stunned by this sudden turn of events. Although there had been rumors floating around, who could read the mind of an Eternal River tier elite? Now that Yang Hao's status had been confirmed, everyone was naturally stunned. Sure enough, Yang Hao had become the 10th disciple of Venerable Trinity. Yang Hao's status rose so dramatically that he was on equal standing with heavenly body tier elites. A faint smile appeared on Yang Hao's face as he looked at Ling Han. However, there was terrifying killing intent hidden in the depths of his eyes. Chapter 1209. Give me a retrial. Chapter 1209. Give me a retrial. Yang Hao had always been a successful genius. He'd been born into a force with a heaven body tier elite, and he had displayed an outstanding cultivation talent from a young age. He had always been as brilliant as the radiant sun in the sky, and people all revered his prodigiousness no matter where he went. His family had extremely high hopes of him. Moreover, he was an invincible prodigy among those of the same generation as him. Everyone respected and feared him. In fact, he had managed to defeat all prodigies that stood in his way even after arriving at the majestic heaven sect. He was the true cream of the crop. He was blessed by the heavens, and he was destined to become a ruler of a region. However, he had suffered great humiliation at the hands of Ling Han. Although it wasn't Ling Han who had defeated him, the fact remained that he had almost been beaten to death by Empress Luan Xing. In the end, he had lost a significant amount of his life essence. This was a great stain on his name, and he would definitely exact revenge on Empress Luan Xing in the future. Right now, however, he would kill Ling Han first that would collect some interest. Han Lin, killing fellow disciples is a serious crime. Not only that, but it's also a despicable action. His voice was cold, and he continued, I suggest that we tie him up in front of the sect entrance and slice a piece of his flesh off every day. We'll continue until he bleeds out and his life essence withers. So ruthless, everyone exclaimed in their minds. It was extremely difficult for immortals to die. As long as their vitals weren't obliterated, they could live on even if their limbs were severed or their blood was drained. After all, severed limbs could regrow, and blood could also be regenerated. However, these recovery methods all consumed one's life essence. Life essence couldn't be seen or touched, yet it did indeed exist. In fact, there were sinister techniques that could suck one's life essence and transform it into nourishment for the wielder of the sinister technique. Doing so would increase the wielder's lifespan by a slight amount, as well as aid the growth of their cultivation. It was clear that Yang Hao wanted Ling Han to experience a slow and excruciating death. He would only die when his life essence completely ran out. This was incredibly cruel. Gao Huang and Hua Yangwan were both secretly alarmed. This young man was an extremely ruthless individual. They definitely couldn't offend him. Ling Han laughed loudly and said, Yang Hao, how pathetic of you. Come. Suppress your cultivation level and fight against me. See how I wipe the floor with you. Yang Hao sneered and said, Who do you think you are? Do you have the right to fight against me? Don't say that I'm bullying you. If we were at the same cultivation level, I could give myself a handicap of 1 hand and 1 foot. Ling Han placed his left hand behind his back, then cracked a grin and said, Actually, I can also handicap my right hand if you want. He placed his right hand behind his back. Arrogant. How extremely arrogant. Uncle Yang, why don't we restrain him first? We can give him some heavy punishment to make him more obedient, Gao Huang suggested. Although he was much older than Yang Hao, and although his cultivation level was also slightly higher, he still placed himself in an extremely lowly position. It was fairly hard for such a proud person to act so subserviently. Yang Hao nodded and said, Great idea. Restrain him. He gazed at Ling Han. How could such a measly being challenge him? Absolutely preposterous. Ling Han's heart shivered. They were finally going to bare their fangs. Once they did, it would also be time for him to enter the Black Tower. He would exact his revenge another day. Humph. It looks like you still haven't learned your lesson yet. You're still biting people like a mad dog. There was a cold humph as Hu Feiyun walked over. However, the aura that radiated from her was far above the mountain river tier. It was Empress Luan Xing. Ling Han's brows knit into a frown. He had already planned his escape. However, the actions of Empress Luan Xing could potentially derail his plans. After all, how could he stay in his Black Tower if Empress Luan Xing was caught in a dangerous situation? She had stepped in to help him, so how could he sit by idly? This was not to mention the budding relationship between him and Empress Luan Xing. Yang Hao had never been afraid of anyone before. However, fear appeared on his face when he saw Empress Luan Xing. He had been beaten senseless by her, so it was hard not to fear her. Pa! The Empress lashed out with her palm, and Yang Hao was instantly sent flying. Pooh! Clouds of blood exploded from Yang Hao's body, and his life essence instantly started to wither. He had been severely wounded. Fortunately, the Empress had held back. Otherwise, how could Yang Hao have survived the attack of a heavenly body tier elite? "Heh, madam, this is already the second time," an icy voice said. This was the majestic Heaven sect. Two figures materialized in the air. They both looked to be 50, and an air of primal chaos shrouded their faces, making it impossible to see their features clearly, for heavenly bodies hovered behind their bodies. "Father!" Gao Huang and Hua Yangwan were delighted to see these two figures. They were the fourth and sixth disciples of Venerable Trinity Gaofeng, the leader of the Gao faction, and Hua Yongning, the leader of the Hua faction. They were both elites at the peak stage of the consummate level of the heavenly body tier. "Madam, you've gone too far," Hua Yongning said coldly. "This is the majestic Heaven sect, not your chaotic star's majestic empire. You two want to obstruct me?" Empress Luan Xing asked calmly. However, there was a domineering air about her voice. In terms of aura, who could compare with a ruler? Moreover, Hua Yongning and Gao Feng weren't even sect leaders. Although their cultivation levels were the same, the might of Empress Luan Xing was far above there. However, Ling Han interrupted, "Your Majesty, this is my private matter. Please don't interfere." He frantically winked at her as he said this. "You already know that I have a spatial god tool. So, who can harm your man?" Empress Luan Xing saw this, yet she said, "He's my subject, and I heard that you people wanted to interrogate him. So, I merely came here to look on." "Look on your mom." Would looking on cause blood to explode from Yang Hao's body? Would it cause his life essence to wither even further? However, there was genuinely nothing they could do if a heavenly body tier elite insisted on twisting the facts, unless they fought. There was a look of apprehension on Hua Yongning's and Gao Feng's face. They were up against an empress, and they definitely couldn't underestimate her. However, they were only apprehensive. After all, they believed that this was merely a spiritual mark left by Empress Luan Xing. As such, there would be a limit to her power. "Fine. We'll let you look on if that's what you so desire." Hua Yongning and Gao Feng both stood with their hands clasped behind their backs. With them keeping watch, there was no way that Empress Luan Xing could cause any great trouble. Yang Hao slowly crawled up from the floor, his eyes burning with anger. "Motherfucker, what about me? Was I hit for nothing? Aren't you going to begin the trial?" Empress Luan Xing asked as she looked at Shenhua. Her aura was devastating, and images of celestial bodies and galaxies flashed through her eyes. Her might was so formidable that Shenhua almost spat blood. He couldn't help but grimace. "Begin what fucking trial? Haven't we already stripped him of his status as a seed and expelled him from the sect?" He hesitated for a moment before re-announcing the decision of the judges. "Pa!" He was immediately struck and sent flying by Empress Luan Xing upon finishing his sentence. He felt as if all of his bones had been broken, and he realized that he couldn't crawl up from the floor. "I disagree with this decision. Redo the trial," Empress Luan Xing said in a domineering manner. "Madam, you've gone too far." Hua Yongning and Gao Feng finally reached their limit. Did she really think that this was the chaotic star's majestic empire? "Heh, young lady, I let the matter slide when you caused a commotion in my sect the first time. However, you've come to cause trouble again. The person you struck just then is my disciple." A terrifying voice traveled over, causing everyone to shiver to the depths of their soul. This was the overwhelming pressure from a transcendent being. Venerable Trinity had come. Chapter 12:10, Venerable Trinity. Chapter 12:10, Venerable Trinity. Who could have imagined that the trial of a measly mountain river tier cultivator would eventually lead to the appearance of an eternal river tier elite? Empress Luan Xing's expression changed drastically. She was powerful, yet she still had yet to reach the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier. So, how could she stand up against an eternal river tier elite? However, she refused to back down, saying, "Senior, heaven and earth are great, but nothing is as great as justice." This nest of rats is cooking up charges and trying to frame the innocent. I can't watch on and do nothing. Heh, young lady, the matters of the majestic heaven sect don't need your input. Venerable Trinity's voice traveled over, yet he was nowhere to be seen. Just answer my question. Why did you wound my disciple? Yang Hao chuckled coldly. Venerable Trinity had bestowed him with a divine sense seal, and this meant that he could contact Venerable Trinity simply by injecting his divine sense into the seal. Reporting matters like this couldn't be any easier. Moreover, this revealed just how much Venerable Trinity liked this new disciple. So what if Empress Luanxing was a heavenly body tier elite? She was nothing but trash before an eternal river tier elite. Yet, she had actually dared to hit him. Not once, but twice. Humph. It was time for her to pay the price. Empress Luanxing raised her brow and said, Senior wants to pick on the weak? Little girl, don't try to constrain me with words. Venerable Trinity said, I can let you off one more time if you kneel down and apologize to my disciple. This was complete and utter humiliation. To say nothing of a ruler like Empress Luanxing, even ordinary heavenly body tier elites couldn't swallow their pride to kneel down and kowtow to a sun-moon tier cultivator. Empress Luanxing's expression changed drastically. She hadn't expected Venerable Trinity to be so protective of his disciples. Could they still reason objectively? However, reason was always held in the hands of elites. Weaklings could only resign themselves to accepting this. Ha, ha, ha. Empress Luanxing laughed coldly. Out of her 9 clones, only one had yet to reach the heavenly body tier. However, with her wealth of experience and her abundance of resources, Hu Feiyun only needed a maximum of 100 years to reach the heavenly body tier. Once Hu Feiyun reached the heavenly body tier, she would be able to advance to the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier. She would then be able to break through to the eternal river tier. King tiers who cultivated each level to perfection would possess a power of 6 stars once they advanced to the next major tier. This would be enough to battle against Venerable Trinity. Based on all the available intelligence, Venerable Trinity was most likely at the late stage of the low extreme of the eternal river tier. However, Empress Luanxing was still too weak at this moment, far too weak. Young lady, it looks like you're unwilling to yield. Venerable Trinity chuckled and said, however, that won't change anything. However, she hit you. So why don't you hit her back? But master, she's at the heavenly body tier. I'm no match for her, Yang Hao replied respectfully. Heh, isn't your master here for you? Venerable Trinity said. Thank you, master. A cold smile instantly appeared on Yang Hao's face. Venerable Trinity had already made his stance very clear, was allowing him to return the favor. With Venerable Trinity protecting him, how could a measly heavenly body tier elite fight back? No matter how freakish a heavenly body tier elite was, they were still like defenseless babies in the eyes of eternal river tier elites. Ling Han's expression became very anxious. It would be extremely humiliating if Empress Luanxing were hit, even if this was only her clone. Empress Luanxing wouldn't be able to tolerate this, and he more so wouldn't be able to tolerate this. Come here, he shouted. So what if Venerable Trinity was present? He was going to put Empress Luanxing in his black tower. She was his future wife, so how could he let her be humiliated? Empress Luanxing had initially planned on causing a commotion and making everyone aware of this injustice. She had wanted to win Ling Han a fair trial. However, she hadn't been able to control her emotions, and she had ended up hitting Yang Hao and causing Venerable Trinity to come. This made the situation even direr than before. However, she was a resolute person, and she immediately dashed toward Ling Han. Venerable Trinity laughed and said, Heh, trying to flee? Empress Luanxing was instantly frozen in place. It was as if she had become a statue. Yang Hao snickered as he walked toward Empress Luanxing. He raised his hand, and he was just about to slap her. He was going to exact his revenge so soon, and this filled him with pleasure. Of course, this was only a clone of Empress Luanxing. If he saw her true appearance, it was very likely that he wouldn't have the heart to slap her. However, being as proud as Empress Luanxing was, she naturally wouldn't use her appearance to garner sympathy. Shua. Yang Hao's hand struck at Empress Luanxing's face. However, a shadow suddenly flashed over. Pa! There was a crisp smacking sound. Ling Han was sent flying by the strike. He had activated the star-plucking step and dashed in front of Yang Hao, blocking the strike for Empress Luanxing. However, even though his physique was powerful, there was still a limit to how much power it could withstand. Yang Hao was at the high extreme of the Sun-Moon tier, and his strike had broken several of Ling Han's godly bones. Wah! Ling Han vomited mouthfuls of blood. After enduring a full-power strike of a Sun-Moon tier elite, black spots swam before his eyes. He was about to faint or even die at any moment. He had never been so close to death before. He forced himself to concentrate as he circulated a drop of indestructible true fluid. His body instantly recovered. Venerable Trinity was astonished by Ling Han's tremendous recovery ability. Although Ling Han's lunging block had also been spectacular, that was simply because Venerable Trinity hadn't paid any attention to him. Otherwise, there was no way Ling Han could have blocked that strike. Meanwhile, Yang Hao's eyes also widened in surprise. He didn't die after being hit by my full-power strike? Heh, so what? That strike was only a whisker away from killing him. He'll be a corpse if I hit again. There's no way he can endure another strike, right? Anyhow, he probably ingested some natural treasures before coming here. Otherwise, how could he have recovered instantly? He chuckled coldly before turning his gaze back to Empress Luanxing. She was being suppressed by Venerable Trinity, meaning that she was completely defenseless. There was no pleasure in slapping a mountain river tier cultivator. If he wanted to slap someone, he would slap heavenly body tier elites. These slaps would be loud, and these slaps would be euphoric. Moreover, the heavenly body tier elite before him had made him spit blood and lose life essence twice, had to exact revenge. He swung his hand at Empress Luanxing again. He knew that Ling Han would definitely lunge over and attempt to block him, but he didn't care at all. Toying with Ling Han felt absolutely amazing. Pong! Sure enough, Ling Han activated the star-plucking step and blocked his strike again. Like before, he was sent flying into the distance. Clouds of blood burst from his body, and several of his godly bones snapped again. This strike was even more vicious as Yang Hao had unleashed the regulations of heaven and earth in addition to his Sun-Moon tier power. Hundreds of divine patterns materialized in the air, intertwining to form a terrifying killing intent. Ling Han was barely hanging on to life. Not being killed by that strike was already thanks to his freakishly tough physique. After all, even those at the high extreme of the Sun-Moon tier couldn't shatter level 5 godly metal with a single strike. All of you deserve to die. Empress Luanxing cried out sharply. There was astounding killing intent in her eyes. A ruler was enraged, and heaven and earth lost their luster. Her body trembled slightly, and it seemed as if she were about to break free from Venerable Trinity's grasp. Heh, young lady, you're far too naive, Venerable Trinity said with a chuckle. The pressure on Empress Luanxing increased explosively, and she was instantly rendered immobile again. Chapter 1211, I've returned. Chapter 1211, I've returned. Ling Han circulated another drop of indestructible true fluid, and his wounds instantly started to mend. However, circulating 2 drops of indestructible true fluid in quick succession caused its effects to decrease dramatically. The second drop of indestructible true fluid was only able to stabilize and mend his wounds, not completely heal them. Even so, his recovery ability was still absolutely stunning. Even Venerable Trinity's interest was piqued, and he remarked, "This youth is fairly outstanding." How high were Venerable Trinity's standards? Being praised as outstanding by him was truly remarkable. A feeling of jealousy welled up in Yang Hao's heart. He was afraid that Venerable Trinity would take a liking to Ling Han's talent and take him as a disciple. If that were to happen, he wouldn't be able to exact his revenge anymore. Moreover, he would have another powerful competitor. The thought of this made him especially uneasy. Sure enough, Venerable Trinity said, "Young man, Are you willing to acknowledge me as master? If he had asked this upon his arrival, perhaps Ling Han would have agreed. Even if his intentions weren't genuine, he could at least take advantage of his new identity to overcome this dire situation. However, Venerable Trinity had suppressed Empress Luanxing and allowed Yang Hao to strike her. Ling Han couldn't accept this. Venerable Trinity was targeting his future wife, yet he still wanted him to acknowledge him as master, and Yang Hao would become his senior brother. No way. Ling Han chuckled and said, "Those who are teachers should be virtuous. Venerable Trinity, do you think you possess the virtue of a teacher?" The surroundings instantly fell silent. Is there something wrong with my ears? Why do I feel like I heard that brat criticizing Venerable Trinity? Gasp. How daring. Someone in this galaxy actually dares to question Venerable Trinity's virtue before his face. Is this a joke? Impudence. Hua Yongning and Gao Feng berated. They hadn't planned on unleashing their might at a measly mountain river tier cultivator, yet who told Ling Han to insult their master? They had no choice but to act. Meanwhile, Yang Hao breathed a sigh of relief. Having insulted Venerable Trinity, there was no way that Ling Han could be taken as his disciple anymore, regardless of how talented he was. He couldn't help but chuckle at Ling Han's stupidity in his mind. True men should know when to yield and when to stand firm. Standing firm when one didn't possess enough power was merely seeking death. He was afraid that Venerable Trinity would let him off the hook due to his appreciation of prodigies. Thus, he immediately charged toward Ling Han, shouting, "How dare you insult my master? You're asking for death." Divine patterns intertwined as his palm struck at Ling Han. He had put all of his power behind this strike. He was going to kill Ling Han and eliminate all future trouble. Wang. Shadows of giant snakes materialized behind Empress Luanxing, each of them measuring tens of thousands of meters in length. They all exuded an ancient and desolate aura. Venerable Trinity's suppression instantly vanished, and she immediately pressed her palm toward Yang Hao. Damn it! Hua Yongning and Gao Feng hurriedly dashed over to block Empress Luanxing's attack. If Yang Hao were killed before them, they would definitely be punished severely. They wouldn't be killed, but they would certainly fall out of favor with Venerable Trinity. If that were to happen, it would be impossible for them to obtain his core inheritance. They couldn't accept such a fate. The two heavenly body tier elites lunged over to block Empress Luanxing's attack. Although they had reacted too late, their closer distance to Yang Hao meant that they were still able to block her attack. Boom! The strikes of the three elites collided together. Pong, 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 pong. Shock waves surged into the surroundings, instantly smashing the palace into smithereens. Pong! Yang Hao was close to the collision, and he was instantly sent flying after being scraped the devastating shock waves. Pa, pa, pa. Several of his bones snapped. Fortunately, he had only been hit by a weak shock wave. Otherwise, he definitely would have died. Hua Yongning and Gao Feng were both astounded. They were all at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier, so why was their power so much weaker? They had teamed up against Empress Luanxing, yet they had still almost lost. They were certain that she hadn't reached the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier yet. So, how was she so powerful? One had to realize that this was only a spiritual mark that she had left. That being the case, just how powerful was her real self? Huh? Young lady, you're a member of the Nine-Snake tribe. Xiao. A figure descended from the sky. He was shrouded in divine light, and it was impossible to see his height or features. However, the aura that radiated from him was absolutely terrifying. He was none other than Venerable Trinity. This eternal river tier elite had actually appeared before them. He had only been interfering casually before, yet had been already able to suppress Empress Luanxing. Although she had escaped his fetters in the end, it wouldn't be hard for him to suppress her again. However, there was only a single reason why he had revealed himself. Empress Luanxing's identity as a member of the Nine-Snake tribe was far too astonishing. Who would have thought? I was actually able to meet a member of the ancient divine tribes. Venerable Trinity said in excitement. He stared at Empress Luan Xing as if there were flowers blossoming from her face. Empress Luan Xing shuddered in apprehension. Although she had unleashed the power of the 9 snakes to break free from Venerable Trinity's grasp, she knew that he had only been suppressing her casually from someplace very far away. He hadn't been using his full power. There was an insurmountable gulf between the heavenly body tier and eternal river tier, and this was a gulf that even her 9 snakes bloodline couldn't overcome. Moreover, she hadn't reached the pinnacle level of heavenly body tier yet, and this was more so only a clone of hers. She was no match for Venerable Trinity. So what? She asked calmly. Meanwhile, she continued to shuffle closer to Ling Han. If Venerable Trinity targeted her again, she would be able to enter the Black Tower with Ling Han. Ancient Divine Tribe. Ha ha, ha 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 ha. Venerable Trinity laughed loudly, and it was clear that he was beside himself with delight. In fact, even the divine light that shrouded his body gradually dimmed and vanished, revealing a skinny and bony elder. The most powerful elite of the galaxy was lost in emotion. This revealed just how excited he was at this moment. However, the more excited Venerable Trinity was, the more anxious Ling Han and Empress Luan Xing became. This signified that Venerable Trinity cared very, very much about this. Master! Yang Hao stuttered as he regained consciousness and struggled to his feet. Although several of his bones had been broken, he could still hold them together with his origin power. Walking properly wasn't much of an issue. In fact, he could still battle, though his battle prowess would definitely be affected. Venerable Trinity ignored him, and he continued to stare at Empress Luan Xing, saying, "Young lady, your bloodline is mine." Sure enough, this old geezer was interested in Empress Luan Xing's bloodline. Although they were unsure of how he was going to obtain it, they knew that this was definitely bad news for Empress Luan Xing. Let's leave. Ling Han lunged over and was just about to place Empress Luan Xing into his Black Tower. Young man, stay out of this. Venerable Trinity didn't need to move, and he was able to restrict Ling Han with just a thought. He raised a hand and grabbed at Empress Luan Xing. Yang Hao's anger surged, and since Empress Luan Xing was being dealt with by Venerable Trinity, he decided to take his fury out on Ling Han. Go die. He threw a fist at Ling Han's head as he lunged toward him. Ling Han. A voice suddenly traveled over, though it sounded like it had come from the ends of the sky. Ling Han. This time, the voice sounded like it was right next to them. Pong! A figure crashed down from the sky. No one saw how she had appeared. However, she coincidentally landed on top of Yang Hao, who was trampled into the ground, forming a human-shaped crater. Ling Han, Nio's returned, the person shouted in joy. Chapter 12:12, Hu Nio is angry. Chapter 12:12, Hu Nio is angry. She was a young girl, and she looked to be around 15 or 16 years old. Her eyes were bright, and her teeth were white. Her beauty was indescribably refreshing. Anyone who saw her would be moved by her demeanor. She would be imprinted in their minds and their bones. However, such a girl had uncannily descended from the sky. In fact, no one had seen how she had appeared. Yet, she had ruthlessly trampled Yang Hao into the ground. They couldn't help but pity Yang Hao. Was he a magnet for suffering? This girl is remarkably powerful. Meanwhile, Ling Han hesitated for a moment before subconsciously asking, Hu Nio? Apart from her, who else referred to themselves as Nio? Ling Han. The young girl instantly dashed over. Pong! She dove into his arms, and she wrapped her legs around his waist. She was especially tall and slender to begin with, so her method of hugging made her a head taller than Ling Han. Ling Han's head was tightly pressed into her chest. Although she was only 15 or 16, her chest was already starting to develop. In fact, there was still a lot of room for growth. One could imagine just how shapely and full it would become in the future. Nio's missed you so much, the young girl exclaimed. Hu Nio, it's really you, Hu Nio. Ling Han was over the moon with delight. The rock palace was still the same as before. Just as they had suddenly appeared before, they suddenly appeared now. Huh? Ling Han, you're wounded. Hu Nio realized that something was off. A murderous aura burst from her body, and she immediately scanned the surroundings. She looked at Venerable Trinity and shouted, "Old geezer, was it you that wounded Nyo's Ling Han?" "Heh." Venerable Trinity replied with an indifferent chuckle. Who was he? He was the most powerful elite in this galaxy. So, why would he argue with a young girl? Though, this young girl did seem a little uncanny. However, even though he ignored them, there was no way that people who insulted an eternal river tier elite could get off so easily. The others would deal with them for him. Gao Feng immediately stepped forward and chided, "How impudent! How dare you disrespect our venerable master?" However, he didn't dare underestimate Nyo even though he scolded her. Although she looked very young, she had displayed her strength by trampling Yang Hao into the ground. Who was Yang Hao? He was a prodigy among prodigies, and he was more so at the high extreme of the Sun-Moon tier. Even though he had already been injured, one would still need to be at the consummate level of the Sun-Moon tier to crush him into the earth. In fact, they might need to be at the heavenly body tier. If this young girl were at the heavenly body tier, which Gao Feng didn't believe to be the case, would need to be very careful. Humph! If Nyo's Ling Han was wounded by that old geezer, I'll rip him to shreds. Nyo said angrily. Even if it wasn't him, he's still clearly the most powerful person here. Yet, he allowed the culprit to wound Nyo's Ling Han. So, Nyo is still going to smash him into pieces. His actions are far too detestable. Nyo, let go. You're about to squish me to death. Ling Han shouted. His face was buried in Nyo's chest, and he was suffocating to death. Hee. Nyo giggled as she climbed off his body like a monkey. She then glowered at the others and said, "These are all bad people. Nyo is going to exterminate them in the name of the moon." Ha ha ha. Many of them burst out laughing. What a naive little girl. This was the Majestic Heaven sect, a sect that was guarded by the #1 elite in the world. Even true dragons would have to lie low if they came. In the minds of the disciples, Venerable Trinity was the strongest being in the world. This wasn't their fault, as such kind of beliefs was determined by the overall level of cultivation of a galaxy. Who could envisage a Genesis tier saint appearing here? "Father, let me deal with her," Gao Huang said as he leaped over. There was a strong sense of lust in his eyes as he stared at Nyo. This girl was innocent and charming, and her beauty was enough to entrance one's soul. He was going to take this opportunity to make her his concubine. Hua Yangwen humphed upon hearing this. He had been enraptured by Nyo's beauty, and this had caused his reaction to become slower. As such, the opportunity was stolen by Gao Huang. Gao Feng pondered over this. His son was at the consummate level of the Sun-Moon tier, and he was more so a 4-star genius. He was far more powerful than Yang Hao. As such, he wouldn't necessarily lose to this young girl. Could such a young girl possibly be at the heavenly body tier? Impossible. Fine, he said with a nod. Don't be careless. The young girl had knocked Yang Hao out with a single stamp, so she was definitely among the top echelon of Sun-Moon tier elites. Understood, Gao Huang replied. He stepped forward and said, "Little girl, I'll give you a chance seeing as you're so young and naive. Hurry up, kowtow, and apologize to Master. Master is benevolent, so perhaps he'll spare your life." He had to receive permission from Venerable Trinity if he wanted to take this enchanting young girl as his concubine. Otherwise, he would be seeking death. Nyo turned to Ling Han and said, "This person is a bad person. Ling Han, can I pummel him?" Ling Han smiled and said, "Of course." He placed a finger on Nyo's forehead and used his divine sense to transfer the events from before. This piece of memory was very short, so it naturally wouldn't have any detrimental effects on Nyo. Nyo shut her eyes and then reopened them. A violent aura instantly burst from her body. Even the surrounding air was affected by her aura, and it transformed into countless blades that pointed at Gao Huang. *T. Gao Feng's expression changed drastically. This power was far too terrifying, and even he was gripped by a feeling apprehension. He frantically attacked the blades, hoping to save his son. "You actually dared to insult Nyo's Ling Han. Die." Hunyo extended her hand forward. Shio, shio, shio. The blades instantly ripped through Gao Huang's body, turning him into a human beehive. Ah! Gao Huang wailed in agony. However, he wasn't killed by his grievous wounds. Hunyo had definitely left him alive on purpose. She had been vicious from a young age, and this hadn't changed with time. Gao Feng was both enraged and shocked. He had already stepped in, yet he still hadn't been able to save his son. Just how powerful was this young girl? And you? There was a menacing look in Hunyo's eyes as she pointed at Hua Yangwen. Boom! An air of primal chaos descended, forming into a boundless universe. Pooh! Hua Yangwen instantly vomited blood. Even though he was at the consummate level of the Sun-Moon tier, he was unable to withstand even a single glance from Hunyo. This wasn't the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was the pieces of flesh that came out with the blood that he vomited. These were pieces of his obliterated organs. She had merely glanced and pointed at him. There hadn't been any origin power fluctuations, and there hadn't been any intertwining regulations, yet the organs of Hua Yangwen, a prodigy at the peak stage of the Sun-Moon tier, had been obliterated just like that. How terrifying was this? Damn it! Gao Huang and Hua Yongning both charged forward to attack Hunyo. Although they were unwilling to believe it, Hunyo's abilities proved that she was a heavenly body tier elite. Otherwise, how could she have severely wounded a Sun-Moon tier elite with a single glance? You two also dare to bully Nyo's Ling Han? Humph! Hunyo made a pressing motion, and the heads of Gao Huang and Hua Yongning instantly exploded with two loud cracks. Even their divine senses were obliterated. Pong! Dust billowed into the air as the two headless corpses thudded into the ground. The surroundings became deathly silent. Everyone trembled as a sense of indescribable terror welled up in their hearts. Gao Huang and Hua Yongning weren't just some random weaklings. No, they were two heavenly body tier elites. Moreover, they had already reached the consummate level. Apart from the Venerable Trinity, no one else in the galaxy should have been able to kill them, let alone insta-kill both of them at once. This young girl, what was her true cultivation? Chapter 12:13. Protecting his disciple. Chapter 12:13. Protecting his disciple. Wasn't Ling Han a bumpkin who had come from a small world after opening the sky? However, the Empress of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire had come to help him, and she had even dared to oppose Venerable Trinity. In any case, they were at least able to accept this. She had been suppressed by Venerable Trinity, and the massive gulf between their power had been evident. It was this mysterious young girl who had descended from the sky that astounded them. She had insta-killed two elites who were at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier. She was definitely at the eternal river tier, right? Ling Han actually had such powerful reinforcements. Even Empress Luanxing felt slightly apprehensive. She hadn't imagined that Ling Han would have such powerful support. Although Notionless Saint was at the Genesis tier, he had already been dead for heaven knew how many years. He had more so refined his own saintly might, so he was nothing more than a nutritious treasure. He would be completely useless in battle. Anyhow, the young girl was clearly very attached to Ling Han. In fact, her attachment was already beyond all reason. It was as if she could slaughter everyone in the world as long as she could enjoy the warmth of Ling Han. With such powerful feelings, she definitely becomes jealous very easily. Perhaps she'll even kill me, Empress Luanxing thought. This wasn't impossible. Even Ling Han was astonished. He knew that the Rock Palace was very impressive, them being able to easily enter small worlds and all. This was something that even many large sects couldn't do. Thus, Hunyo would have definitely improved in leaps and bounds. However, one had to realize that his cultivation speed wasn't slow, either. No, it wasn't just not slow, it was astonishingly quick. Who else in this galaxy could reach the peak stage of the pinnacle level of the Mountain River tier before the age of 30? Anyhow, he was certain that the Rock Palace wouldn't let Hunyo run around by herself. That old woman in cyan was definitely protecting her in secret. That old woman was terrifyingly powerful, so she didn't need to worry about Hunyo causing a commotion. Even so, He was still stunned to discover that Hu Niu had become so powerful. She could kill heavenly body-tier elites at will, and her cultivation speed was so fast that he could only admit inferiority. With Hu Niu as a comparison, could he still refer to himself as a prodigy? No, he was definitely an idiot, a massive idiot. Ling Han isn't an idiot, Hu Niu said. It was as if she had read his mind. She hugged him and pecked him on the cheek before saying, Niu will help Ling Han become stronger. Everyone was rendered speechless. This young girl had been like a god of death just then, yet she was suddenly like a gentle girlfriend now. They could barely believe that this was the same person. At this moment, they were extremely jealous of Ling Han. Who was this person? He had won the heart of a breathtakingly beautiful and stunningly powerful elite. Moreover, this elite was a young girl who could be educated slowly. Just thinking about this gave them a nosebleed. The pitiable Yang Hao stood up shakily. He had been knocked unconscious by Hu Niu's stomp just then, so he was still unaware of the current situation. He simply felt very aggrieved. He had been knocked unconscious twice today. He was the #1 prodigy of the majestic Heaven sect, and he had more so been taken as a disciple of an eternal river tier. However, he had been knocked out twice immediately after enjoying this huge leap in status. How could he accept this? Boom! Yang Hao's black hair shot up as he bristled in anger. Flames burst to life around him, the embodiment of his fury. He glared at Hu Niu. Apart from her, there was no other newcomer present. Thus, it was evidently her who had used some unknown technique to knock him unconscious. He didn't know what technique she had used, yet he was completely unafraid. After all, this was the majestic Heaven sect. Under the effects of his wild fury, he failed to notice the corpses of his 2 senior brothers lying on the ground. Meanwhile, Gao Huang and Hua Yangwen were still wailing in agony and vomiting mouthfuls of blood. Yang Hao didn't see or hear any of this. There was only a single thought in his mind at this moment, and that thought was revenge. Fucking edge *T. Do you all think I'm a pushover? However, Venerable Trinity finally opened his mouth. There was a strong sense of warning in his voice. This young girl had insta-killed his 2 disciples, and he had actually failed to determine her cultivation. This astonished him greatly. Her cultivation level and strength definitely weren't below his. However, she was far too young, so Venerable Trinity didn't believe that she could defeat him. What frightened him was her background. Her sect or clan was capable of raising such a young eternal river tier elite. Didn't this mean that they were a Genesis tier force? An enraged saint could annihilate an entire galaxy with a wave of their hand. Even eternal river tier elites were like ants before them. This was especially the case with him, as he was only at the low extreme of the eternal river tier. The gulf between him and a small saint was unfathomable. Thus, he decided to swallow this loss. Master! Yang Hao felt extremely aggrieved. Why was Venerable Trinity stopping him? Didn't he see his handsome face being trampled into the ground? Just how humiliating was that? Everyone around him shook their heads furiously. They prayed that Yang Hao wouldn't provoke Ling Han anymore. That person was a bringer of misfortune. Can't you see? 2 heavenly body tier elites have already been killed, and another 2 sun moon tier elites are clearly in their death throes. If you provoke him anymore, you'll definitely be crushed to death as well. You're merely a disciple of Venerable Trinity, but what about Han Ling? He's the lover of an eternal river tier elite. Is there any comparison at all? Yang Hao was beside himself with fury. However, he didn't dare to disobey Venerable Trinity's command. He forcefully suppressed his anger and stood with his hands by his sides. However, even though he suppressed his anger, would Hu Niu let him off so easily? These people actually dared to interrogate her Ling Han. They all deserve to die. She swept her gaze over Empress Luan Xing, and her killing intent was evident. How irritating. I just dragged those other women away from Ling Han. Yet another one had come? Fortunately, she isn't as beautiful as Niu. I can be at ease. This was because she hadn't seen the true appearance of Empress Luan Xing. Otherwise, she definitely wouldn't feel at ease. A measly being like you actually dared to feel jealous of Niu's Ling Han? Hunyo decided to start from the greatest culprit first. She glared at Yang Hao and said, "Nyo's going to exterminate you." Yang Hao found this quite amusing. She was a young girl who referred to herself as Nyo One. So how powerful could she be? She was clearly a naive and effeminate girl who had just stepped into the real world. However, this young girl was far too beautiful. Yang Hao felt that the sum of all the beauties he had seen in his entire life was only barely able to rival the beauty of this innocent girl. His flames of anger were quickly extinguished by her charisma. Meanwhile, Hunyo launched an attack at him. Boom! It was as if heaven were collapsing as countless meteors rained down from the sky. Raging flames seared through the sky, and the main peak of the majestic heaven sect tremored dangerously. It was an apocalyptic scene. Yang Hao instantly wet himself in fright. What fucking cultivation does she have? She unleashed a single technique, yet it's as if heaven and earth are collapsing and the universe is imploding. Stop! Venerable Trinity finally stepped in. He hadn't reacted in time when his other two disciples had been killed just then. After all, even he hadn't imagined that Hunyo would be so powerful. However, Yang Hao was his newest disciple, and he had extremely high hopes for him. Yang Hao definitely couldn't die. This was a technique unleashed by an eternal river tier elite. Wang. A silver river flowed from his body, and it was as if it could connect past with present. The silver river raised his aura to the extreme. Pa, pa, pa. Everyone in the majestic heaven sect collapsed to the ground. This aura was far too terrifying. This was the overwhelming pressure from a transcendent being. Meanwhile, the silver river formed a barrier around Yang Hao, forming almost the strongest defense in the world. Chapter 12:14. Who else wants to harm Nyo's Ling Han? Chapter 12:14. Who else wants to harm Nyo's Ling Han? The silver river flowed around Yang Hao's body, and there were countless great stars flashing within it. Eternal river tier elites could crush heavenly body tier elites. This wasn't just empty talk. In fact, this notion was evident simply by looking at the silver river. Countless great stars orbited within it, and it was clear that the power of eternal river tier elites was miles ahead of heavenly body tier elites. Yang Hao immediately regained his composure. Now that his master had stepped in, no one could do him any harm. Kill him? What a joke. However, he was extremely curious about the young girl's identity. She was far too powerful, so much so that Venerable Trinity had to step in to protect him. She was so young, yet she was already so powerful. If he could marry her, flames of greed and lust burned in his heart. This girl was breathtakingly beautiful, and she was also astoundingly powerful. How could he not be attracted? Meanwhile, Hunyo casually swung a fist at him. Pa! The silver river shattered into pieces, and all the great stars within it exploded into shards. Boom, boom, boom. A brilliant light soared into the sky. What? Yang Hao's feeling of lust instantly transformed into a feeling of boundless terror. Venerable Trinity had unleashed his silver river to protect him, yet this silver river had been shattered by a casual punch from the young girl. It was clear that Venerable Trinity was no match for her. The strength of the young girl was already on a mythological level. Hunyo reached over and plucked Yang Hao up. She cocked her head as she looked at him, and then said in a strange voice, "You look so ugly, yet you still dared to oppose Nyo's Ling Han. What a retard." Pa! Venerable Trinity slumped onto the ground. Under this powerful force, a fissure instantly appeared on the already unstable main peak. This fissure ran all the way from the top of the peak to the foot of the mountain. Boom! The entire main peak collapsed to the ground. This was utterly terrifying. Hunyo hadn't targeted Venerable Trinity, and she had simply shattered his defenses with a single punch. However, the shock waves from her attack had caused Venerable Trinity to lose control of his body and sit heavily on the main peak, resulting in its collapse. Rumble. Heaven and earth were collapsing, yet the onlookers were all frozen like statues. They were pelted by the violent rain of crushed rocks, yet it was as if they couldn't feel anything. They were transfixed with pure shock. In the beginning, Everyone had thought that Hunyo was at the peak stage of the Sun-Moon tier. It was because of this cultivation that she had been able to trample Yang Hao unconscious. However, after she defeated Gao Huang and Yang Hao, everyone speculated that she was at the heavenly body tier. Yet Hunyo immediately went on to insta-kill 2 elites at the peak stage of the heavenly body tier. Everyone's evaluation of her cultivation naturally rose again, this time to the Eternal River tier. However, it was abundantly clear that this wasn't her true cultivation. She hadn't targeted Venerable Trinity with her punch, yet Venerable Trinity had slumped to the ground anyway. She had a crushing advantage over Venerable Trinity. Was she at the medium extreme of the Eternal River tier, or high extreme, or consummate level? Genesis tier, the Venerable Trinity stammered in shock. He had witnessed a battle between a demon master and a saint on the 2-realm battlefield. They had possessed a power that could obliterate the world. Saints possessed the power of creation, while demon masters possessed the power of destruction. Neither power was superior or inferior, and their quality was simply dependent on their wielder. Pooh! Everyone's mind became numb with shock. This young girl was actually a saint. Saints were the most powerful beings in the world. They were invincible. Fuck! Master! Venerable Trinity. Numerous figures streaked toward the collapsed peak. These were the heavenly body tier elites of the majestic Heaven sect. The battle here was incredibly intense, and they would be a stain on the name of heavenly body tier elites if they still didn't react to the commotion. However, they were all stupefied when they arrived. What in the world was going on? Venerable Trinity had slumped on the ground, his hair disheveled and his aura of immortality gone. Who could force an Eternal River tier elite into such a sorry state? What on earth happened? Someone asked in shock. This was what they all wanted to know. They didn't dare to ask Venerable Trinity, but they could grab the others and force them to answer. After learning about the current situation, their faces all became as white as a sheet. If Venerable Trinity weren't sitting on the ground, they truly wouldn't be able to believe that someone in this galaxy was actually powerful enough to defeat him. Genesis tier saint? That young girl? How was this possible? Her chi and blood were flourishing, and it was clear that she was as young as she looked. She was definitely under 100 years old. However, most super geniuses could only reach the Mountain River tier at the age of 100. Even advancing to the Sun-Moon tier would be regarded as incredible. That being the case, how should they regard such a young Genesis tier saint? Pa. Hunyo naturally wouldn't care what others thought about her. She ruthlessly slapped Yang Hao, and his face instantly became swollen like a pig. She giggled and said, Ling Han, doesn't he look way more handsome now? Ling Han laughed loudly and said, that's right, he looks far more pleasing to the eye now. Hunyo smiled happily upon hearing Ling Han's praise. She was extremely cheerful, and she proudly said, indeed, my crafting skills are first-rate. Although Yang Hao had been slapped, he hadn't fainted. He looked at Ling Han, and then he looked at Hunyo. He felt as if heaven were playing a sick joke on him. How does Ling Han have such a powerful background? If he had known this earlier, he wouldn't have dared to target Ling Han even if someone had given him a saint tool. After all, he had the protection of a Genesis tier saint. He was filled with hate and fury. In what way was he inferior to Ling Han? His talent wasn't inferior, and his appearance was even superior. Yet, why was this enchanting and powerful girl deeply in love with Ling Han? I was wrong, he said through gritted teeth. Great beings knew when to yield and when not to yield. If he lived through this disaster, he would definitely grit his teeth and cultivate as hard as he could. He would exact his revenge when he reached the Genesis tier in the future. In any case, he could also be counted as a person with strong willpower. Otherwise, who would dare to consider exacting revenge on a Genesis tier saint? Just thinking about this was enough to make one cower. Of course you were wrong. So, go die. Hunyo smiled as she swung her arm. Xiao. Yang Hao was tossed into the air by her. Pung! A meteor in the sky exploded into pieces, transforming into a vast rain of rocks and metal. She had tossed Yang Hao into the galaxy, and he had smashed into a meteor. Moreover, the impact had been so great that even the meteor had exploded into pieces. One could imagine Yang Hao's miserable fate. He had definitely been crushed into smithereens. In fact, not even a shred of his existence would remain. This was the formidable power of Genesis tier saints. In the eyes of the onlookers, this was an unfathomable power. "Old geezer, it's your turn now," Hunyo said. She reached toward Venerable Trinity. Pa! Her hand wrapped around Venerable Trinity's neck. Under her overwhelming power, Eternal River tier elites were like measly ants. They couldn't fight back at all. At this moment, everyone finally believed that Hunyo was a Genesis tier saint. Otherwise, how could she possess such formidable power? Such a young saint. How could they accept this? Who are you? Venerable Trinity asked. He didn't beg for his life. How could any other person affect the decision of a Genesis tier saint? He simply wanted to know whom he had provoked. Nyo is Ling Han's Hunyo. Hunyo cocked her head and said, "Old geezer, why are you so stupid? Ah, no wonder you dared to target Nyo's Ling Han. So it turns out that you're a big idiot." Pa. Hunyo started to slap Venerable Trinity. "Despicable old geezer, you actually dared to harm Nyo's Ling Han. Luckily, Ling Han is fine. Otherwise, Nyo would have become angry." Everyone was speechless. "You've already dominated the majestic heaven sect, okay? Does this not count as being angry? What are you like when you're angry?" Of course, no one dared to ask this question. After all, she was a Genesis tier saint. "I've played enough." Hunyo casually tossed Venerable Trinity into the air. She then threw a fist at him. Pa! Venerable Trinity instantly exploded into pieces. Not a single bone of his remained intact. An innocent smile blossomed across the young girl's face. Her expression was clear and beautiful, and she asked, "Who else wants to harm Nyo's Ling Han?" Chapter 12:15. Eliminating all witnesses. Chapter 12:15. Eliminating all witnesses. Hunyo swept her gaze around the surroundings. Everyone fell to their knees, not daring to hold her gaze. In any case, they didn't feel ashamed for kneeling. After all, this was a saint. "Girl, that's enough. Follow me back to the palace," an old woman in cyan said. No one had seen how she had arrived. Her appearance was sudden, yet her existence seemed especially natural. It was as if she had been standing there the entire time. It was just that no one had noticed her. They couldn't sense the old woman's aura, and it seemed as if she were just an ordinary person. Ling Han knew that this old woman wouldn't let Hunyo run around by herself. However, what astounded him was the fact that the old woman in cyan was still worried about Hunyo even though she had already reached the Genesis tier. Just how powerful is the Rock Palace's enemy? Are they so powerful that even saints need protection? Perhaps Hunyo is only a small saint, whereas their enemy is a saint king? Hunyo shook her head frantically and said, "No, I don't want to." She leaped into Ling Han's arms and hugged him tightly, saying, "Nyo doesn't want to leave Ling Han again." "No way." The old woman in cyan tapped her walking stick on the ground and said, "If you stay here, you'll endanger not only yourself, but also that young lad." This old grandma understood the situation fairly well. She knew that convincing Hunyo alone would be useless, so she added Ling Han into the equation. Hunyo's expression instantly became serious, and she stopped acting so immaturely. Everyone was stunned. Judging by the old woman's words, it seemed as if even Genesis tier saints weren't powerful enough to protect themselves. A ruthless expression appeared on the old woman's face, and she said, "You people know too much." She casually waved her left hand. Pa. Everyone in the surroundings exploded into clouds of blood. Ling Han had reacted quickly, and he had hurriedly entered the Black Tower with Empress Luan Xing. During such a dangerous situation, he obviously couldn't worry about whether or not his Black Tower was exposed. However, saints could create worlds, genuinely open up space, and thus forge spatial god tools. So, the old woman probably wouldn't be envious of Ling Han's spatial god tool. Sure enough, The old woman in cyan merely stared at him for a moment before saying, "Young lad, keep your mouth shut and don't tell anyone about today's events." This old woman was extremely ruthless. Hunyo had only attacked and killed those people to exact revenge for Ling Han. However, the old woman in cyan had killed over 20 heavenly body tier elites simply to keep a secret. Moreover, it was clearly her who had made a slip of the tongue. No, in fact, she hadn't really made a slip of the tongue. After all, she hadn't revealed any secrets at all. These people had died a meaningless death. Hunyo was furious upon hearing the old woman's words, and she jabbed her finger at her before fuming, "Ugly old woman, you dare to threaten Nyo's Ling Han? Nyo is going to banish you to the borderlands to be a coolie." The old woman in cyan was both exasperated and helpless. Who told this disobedient girl to be the successor of the Rock Palace? She pondered for a moment before saying, "I'll give you 3 days. After 3 days, you must follow me back." Hunyo's eyes darted around, and she said, "Deal." She then waved her hand and said, "Ugly old woman, hurry up and go away. Just looking at you is annoying me." The old woman in cyan humphed in displeasure. She then turned around and took a step, after which her entire body disappeared. More figures hurried over from the distance at this moment. Some were flying in the sky, while others were running on the ground. These were the elites who had come to participate in the auction. However, the commotion here had been far too loud, so they decided to pause the auction and hurry over. Hunyo grabbed Ling Han and said, "Let's leave." Xiao. They instantly traveled hundreds of millions of kilometers away from the majestic Heaven sect. They had disappeared without a trace. When the elites arrived, they discovered that the main peak had already become a pile of obliterated rubble. They could vaguely sense a powerful aura in the blood here, and this aura was so overwhelming that they didn't dare near it. A terrifying speculation formed in their minds. However, they refused to believe this speculation. Was anyone in this galaxy powerful enough to threaten Venerable Trinity? However, the majestic Heaven sect had been obliterated, and a heavy sense of grief hung in the air. So, where had Venerable Trinity gone? This became an eternal mystery. Even sometime tens of millions of years later, people still didn't know what had happened on this day. Ling Han, have you missed Nyo? In someplace far, far away, Ling Han and Hunyo sat on a boulder that overlooked the sea. The young girl was resting in Ling Han's lap, and there was a look of attachment on her face. "Of course I have." Ling Han smiled and said, "I was planning to look for you after I reached the Sun-Moon tier. However, who would have thought that you'd find me first?" Hunyo immediately started to giggle, and she said, "There's no way you could have found me." "Why?" Ling Han asked. Hunyo pondered for a moment before saying, "Because Nyo is in the celestial realm. You can't go there yet." "Celestial realm? What's the celestial realm?" Ling Han asked. "Ahem." The old woman in cyan silently appeared and said, "Girl, you'll only endanger him if you say too much. Fuck, she's like an unshakable shadow." Hunyo pouted and said, "I know." She then shuffled closer to Ling Han and whispered, "Ling Han, let's have kids." "Pooh." Ling Han instantly spluttered aloud. The old woman in cyan was also furious, and she said, "Girl, if you continue, I'll kill this young lad." Hunyo humphed and said, "You guys are so boring. I was only joking." However, Ling Han and the old woman in cyan both knew that Hunyo wasn't joking. She could definitely do such things. Ling Han pondered for a moment before saying, "Let's go back. Otherwise, the others will all be anxious." "Rotten old lady, it's all your fault," Hunyo said in displeasure. She had wanted to take this opportunity to conceive an adorable son with Ling Han. However, the old lady had broken her promise and followed them in secret. The old woman in cyan humphed in reply. She admitted that Ling Han was prodigious, being able to cultivate to his current level in such a short amount of time. However, he was still eons away from being a suitable match for the young successor of the Rock Palace. Their relationship was absolutely impossible. Ling Han and Hunyo went to the Mo clan establishment. Ling Han, Shui Yinyu, and the others immediately ran over. They had all heard about the commotion on the Majestic Heaven sect just then, so they were naturally worried about Ling Han. They finally breathed a sigh of relief after seeing him. Shui Yinyu wanted to leap into Ling Han's arms, yet she was immediately plucked up by Hun Yo. There was killing intent in Hun Yo's eyes, and she said, "Ling Han, this bewitching woman tried to assassinate you. Let me kill her." "Nonsense." Ling Han hurriedly shook his head in disapproval. This girl was as jealous as always. Hun Yo pouted unhappily, and her eyes darted around. She would definitely take this bewitching woman with her when she left. She couldn't leave her by Ling Han's side. Huh? Hun Yo. Feng Puyun, Mu Rongqing, and Helian Tianyun exclaimed in astonishment. They had personally witnessed Hun Yo leaving, and they hadn't expected her to suddenly appear again. Hun Yo completely ignored them. There was only Ling Han in her eyes, and she didn't give a toss about anyone else. Huh? She's Hun Yo? Ding Ping asked in surprise. He had heard his master and his uncles mention her before. Wah, such a beautiful girl. The old ginseng was also here, and he involuntarily started to drool upon seeing Hun Yo. This young girl was far too beautiful. His lust made him fearless, and he immediately lunged toward Hun Yo, saying, "Young girl, let Grandpa Ginseng examine your development." Chapter 12:16, Celestial Realm. Chapter 12:16, Celestial Realm. Pa. The old ginseng was just about to act all perverted, yet he suddenly felt his body tighten. He had already been captured by Hun Yo. He looked up, only to see that this beautiful girl was suddenly wearing an uncouth expression. Her dainty mouth was slightly open, and drool was flowing freely from her mouth. "Look, Ling Han, I caught an old ginseng king." Hun Yo was still a little glutton. She wiped the drool from her mouth as she looked around and said, "Huh? Where's the pot? Hurry up and set up a pot. Nyo is going to make this old ginseng king into stew." "Save me," the old ginseng wailed. "Why didn't this girl play by the rules?" Ling Han smiled and said, "This old ginseng is still useful. Let him go for now." "Oh." Hun Yo nodded in disappointment. However, she immediately started to bargain, saying, "Then I'll only eat half. Is that okay?" "No," the old ginseng hurriedly shouted. What kind of person was she? Couldn't she see that he had already developed intelligence and become a ginseng king? She should be kneeling and kowtowing before him. Hun Yo naturally ignored him. She looked at Ling Han with big and hopeful eyes. Ling Han laughed loudly before turning to the old ginseng and saying, "You've come across a glutton, so it's impossible for you to remain unscathed. I suggest you donate a few of your roots. Otherwise, this glutton will never let you go." The old ginseng had no option but to begrudgingly pluck a few of his roots and hand them to Ling Han. Ling Han chucked them into a pot and added an abundant amount of demonic beast meat and godly medicine. This was an extremely nutritious pot of soup. So fragrant. Although Hun Yo was already a Genesis tier saint, her love for food still remained unchanged. She ran around and jumped up and down as Ling Han cooked. Which part of her seemed like a Genesis tier saint? She was more like a lively monkey. When Ling Han told them that Hun Yo had become a saint, they almost fainted in shock. In the immortal realm, becoming a saint marked the end of the cultivation journey. Saints were the most powerful beings in the world. However, Hun Yo had reached the Genesis tier in just a mere few years. How could they accept this? In any case, Ling Han wouldn't lie to them. Although they ate meat and drank soup together, they all felt like they were in a dream. Everything seemed hazy and unreal. In the following 3 days, Hun Yo stuck with Ling Han everywhere. She racked her brains for methods to escape with Ling Han, though the old woman in cyan would appear whenever she attempted to escape. She would thwart Hun Yo's attempts and stop her from mucking around. Rest assured, although I don't know where the celestial realm is, and although I don't know what kind of place it is, I'll definitely go there one day. Ling Han said resolutely. He would go not just for Hun Yo, but also for his parents, son, and lovers. Nyo believes you. Hun Yo nodded and said, "I'll patiently wait for a few more centuries." Ling Han, You can definitely make it into the celestial realm. She glanced around for a moment before saying, Nyo will tell you some secrets. Although Nyo liked to muck around, she was still aware of what was important and what was not. She told Ling Han some cultivation secrets, and she also modified the cloud-piercing shuttle for him, making it far more capable of traveling through the galaxy. Her modifications also allowed the cloud-piercing shuttle to house a star chart formation. This was an extremely easy task for Genesis tier saints. After all, they could already create entire worlds. During these 3 days, Ling Han tried his best to absorb the information that Nyo told him. There wasn't long before they had to separate again. On the 4th day, the old woman in cyan appeared and dragged the wailing Nyo away. She took a step and vanished into heaven and earth. Of course, at Nyo's strong request, the bewitching Shui Yinyu was also taken away. This girl was extremely prone to becoming jealous. If Wu Feiyun hadn't still been in the Black Tower, she would have definitely been taken away as well. Ling Han inhaled the lingering fragrance of Nyo. It was as if he were in a dream. Nyo's appearance had affected him immensely. He immediately entered the Black Tower to visit Notionless Saint. Senior, are there any tiers above the Genesis tier? He asked. Impossible, the Notionless Saint answered. The Genesis tier is the conclusion of the cultivation path. It's impossible to advance another step. Then, has Senior ever heard of the Celestial Realm before? Ling Han asked. Celestial Realm? Notionless Saint murmured. If he still possessed a physical body, he would definitely be wearing an expression of confusion at this moment. Sigh. Small Tower appeared and said, I hadn't wanted to tell you so soon. However, since you already know bits and pieces, I may as well tell you more. Otherwise, you'll simply feel uneasy. You know about it? Ling Han asked in surprise. Small Tower ignored him and said, there are naturally more tiers above the Genesis tier. Meanwhile, the Celestial Realm is where these people reside. Impossible, Notionless Saint exclaimed in shock. Where exactly is this Celestial Realm? Ling Han asked. He had come from a small world, so he could easily accept the fact that there was a higher transcendent realm above the immortal realm. After all, wasn't the immortal realm transcendent above the small worlds? The Small Tower remained calm and replied, only when you reach the peak stage of the Genesis tier and grasp both the power of construction and power of destruction will you be able to open the passageway to the Celestial Realm. Otherwise, you'll never be able to find it. Both the power of construction and power of destruction? Ling Han's heart jolted. Saints possess the power of construction, while demon masters possess the power of destruction. I have to grasp both the regulations of the immortal realm and the regulations of the netherworld before I can enter the celestial realm? Is this a transcendent realm? Ling Han asked. No, the celestial realm is a part of the immortal realm. It's just that it's been sealed, Small Tower replied. Meanwhile, Notionless Saint was transfixed with shock. Although he had once been a saint, his head still went numb when he learned of this realidio. That's right, he didn't have a head anymore. Anyhow, he was absolutely stunned. It's been sealed? By whom? Why did they seal it? Ling Han pressed for more information. Only a tiny bit of my memory has returned, so it's pointless for you to ask so much. Small Tower didn't have an answer for him this time. It continued, raise your cultivation level and grasp both the power of construction and power of destruction. When you succeed, you'll naturally be able to enter the celestial realm to look for answers. Ling Han nodded slowly. A great sense of urgency gripped at his mind. It was clear that both the Black Tower and the indestructible Heaven Scroll were from the celestial realm. Otherwise, the ability of the Black Tower would be far too astonishing. It could accelerate the growth of godly medicines, and it could also become as good as invisible. The Black Tower itself was also immune to all techniques and attacks. This was because the Black Tower had been forged by regulations that were transcendent above the immortal realm. That being the case, the original owner of the Black Tower had definitely been wounded or killed by someone in the celestial realm. This towering enemy was waiting for him in the celestial realm. It seemed like he was advancing in leaps and bounds, Yet the appearance of Hunyo told him that it was extremely easy to reach the Genesis tier in the celestial realm. Of course, the Rock Palace was a supremely powerful sect. Members of ordinary sects most likely weren't as frightening as Hunyo. Moreover, Hunyo had been a peerless elite in her past life, and this was part of the reason behind her terrifying advancement pace. However, he could still imagine the countless number of super geniuses in the celestial realm. There were probably even more elites. Meanwhile, it was possible that he was going to compete against the prodigies of the celestial realm soon. Eventually, he would even have to battle against the celestial realm elites. This would be extremely fun, no? Ling Han's blood boiled in excitement, and his fighting spirit soared through the sky. Chapter 12:17, Location of the Five Sects. Chapter 12:17, Location of the Five Sects. Who would have imagined that the once invincible majestic heaven sect would actually collapse one day? Venerable Trinity had disappeared, and the 24 heavenly body tier elites had also vanished. It was hard to believe that they weren't dead. Although the majestic heaven sect had never referred to itself as the strongest force in the galaxy, it was obvious that the existence of an eternal river tier would intimidate the entire galaxy. Now that the elites of the majestic heaven sect had suddenly disappeared, the galaxy naturally descended into chaos and turmoil. Long absent and large-scale battles were imminent, and planets would perhaps even invade other planets. The battles wouldn't be limited to continents. However, true elites would also rise from these great battles after all. How could supreme prodigies appear in times of peace and inactivity? Meanwhile, the disciples of the majestic heaven sect also returned where they had come from, be that their clans or their kingdoms. As for Ling Han, he decided to remain on the flying cloud planet for a little longer. Here, the Mo clan was currently using their network to help him look for the five sects. However, this required time. In any case, Ling Han would only set off after breaking through to the Sun-Moon tier anyway. Thus, he wasn't in much of a hurry. Hunyo had told Ling Han some cultivation secrets, for example, the uses of mountains and rivers, suns and moons, and heavenly bodies. These entities weren't merely limited to storing power, and they could actually be unleashed to suppress one's opponent. In fact, they could even form their own worlds. For example, one could unleash their mountains and rivers and trap their opponent within this landscape. Meanwhile, suns and moons and heavenly bodies were naturally more powerful. The overall level of cultivation in this galaxy was far too low, and thus cultivators' utilization of their own power was also extremely limited. Such situations would never appear in high-level galaxies. So, it turns out that I can still raise my battle prowess by a significant amount. Ling Han murmured to himself. He suppressed his cultivation level and battled against Ding Ping, Feng Piyun, and the others. Their cultivation levels were the same, yet Ling Han's battle prowess instantly increased explosively when he unleashed his mountains and rivers to suppress his opponent. This was because unleashing his mountains and rivers created a scenario where he was battling in his own world. Thus, he could naturally detect all the movements of his opponent. Moreover, he could also use his world to continually affect his opponent. Even if hundreds upon thousands of mountain river tier cultivators were to attack me at this moment, I would be able to divide and defeat them one by one. In terms of unleashing one's full potential, this galaxy is still stagnant at a primitive level. However, Venerable Trinity clearly unleashed his eternal river at that time. He unleashed a silver river that formed a defensive barrier around Yonghao. He probably learned that secret technique at the two-realm battlefield. However, he didn't teach this secret technique to the disciples of his sect. Perhaps he was planning to teach this secret technique to his true successor only. Ling Han wasn't one to keep his knowledge from others. Although he wasn't generous enough to teach such a secret technique to everyone, he would definitely teach it to those close to him, such as Feng Piyun, Mu Rongqing, Ding Ping, and the others. Moreover, he would naturally teach it to Hu Feiyun as well. Once she learned it, Empress Luanxing would have also learned it. As for whether she taught it to others, Ling Han didn't care at all. This was simply a technique to fully utilize one's mountains and rivers, suns and moons, and heavenly bodies. It wasn't some unteachable secret. Several days later, the chaotic star's majestic empire sent a starship to collect cultivators from the empire. Hu Feiyun, Li Weiwei, and the others all boarded the starship to return. Ling Han had initially wanted to kill Zhao Luan as well, yet he had fled quickly and returned to the joint peace planet on a merchant ship. Meanwhile, Feng Piyun, Mu Rongqing, and the others didn't leave. They wanted to search for the five sects alongside Ling Han. They had all come from the small world, so they naturally couldn't forget the sins of the five sects. Everyone cultivated earnestly. Once they learned of the five sects' location, they would immediately set off for that galaxy. At that time, bloodshed would be inevitable. Thus, the more powerful they were, the better. Due to the collapse of the majestic Heaven sect, the two other forces on the flying cloud planet, the Four Seas Majestic Empire and the Great Heaven Majestic Empire, were finally able to rise. They invaded and conquered the land that had previously belonged to the Majestic Heaven sect. This naturally led to a series of large-scale battles. However, these battles had nothing to do with Ling Han. He simply guarded his own plot of land. Meanwhile, he used copious amounts of level 4 godly metal obtained by the Imo clan establishment to raise the level of his divine demon sword. Before setting off to search for the five sects, there were two goals that he had to satisfy: break through to the Sun-Moon tier and evolve the divine demon sword to level 5 godly metal. He had already reached the pinnacle level of the Mountain River tier, yet breaking through to the Sun-Moon tier still wasn't something that he could in a short amount of time. This required not only the accumulation of comprehension, but also the accumulation of origin power. Advancing from the Mountain River tier to the Sun-Moon tier was a huge leap. Thus, one needed to accumulate enough comprehension and origin power before attempting to break through. Otherwise, they would be sucked dry. Ling Han also prepared godly medicines as he completed his accumulation. If his accumulation turned out to be insufficient, he could at least still rely on a large number of godly medicines to make up for any deficiencies. This would save him from the wretched fate of having his life essence sucked dry. He was so busy that he had no time to focus on alchemy. He basically sat under the reincarnation tree every single day, cultivating the Mountain River tier to perfection as he explored the great Tao of the Sun-Moon tier. Half a year flew by in the blink of an eye. To immortals, half a year was truly like the blink of an eye. To Ling Han and the others, however, this was several hundred years of comprehension. Ling Han was already confident that he could break through to the Sun-Moon tier. At the same time, the Imo clan also delivered some good news. They had found the location of the five sects. They were on the Cloud Apex planet, a planet that was located in the Long Light Galaxy. The Cloud Apex planet was a 200-year flight away from the Flying Cloud planet. This was an extremely long distance. Otherwise, it wouldn't have taken the Imo clan so long to find them. In fact, they had only found the five sects after contacting merchant after merchant and slowly spreading and expanding their network. Fortunately, Hunyo had modified his cloud-piercing shuttle and made it many times faster than ordinary starships. She had also installed a star chart, and thus they didn't need to worry about getting lost. Their trip would take around 2 years. Very well, Ling Han began to break through to the Sun-Moon tier. After 7 days, he opened the door to a completely new world. A red sun formed in his dantian, and heavenly tribulation also rumbled over at this moment. Ling Han would repeat his agonizing process again. He would shatter his godly bones and temper them under the tribulation, causing them to become tougher and stronger than before. Meanwhile, the auctioning of his 4 drops of thousand source true fluid and the abundant amount of ancient pill recipes had also brought him a great amount of wealth. Not only had he cleared his debt, but he still had a large amount of leftover wealth to spend on level 4 godly metal. That was exactly what he did next. Only at this moment did Ling Han feed his divine demon sword the last piece of level 4 godly metal. His divine demon sword advanced to level 5. Human and sword faced heavenly tribulation together. Boom! Thunder rumbled and lightning flashed. This was a terrifying scene. Like always, Ling Han shattered his godly bones. Meanwhile, a web of cracks appeared on the divine demon sword. However, it didn't snap. Instead, It continued to expel a large number of metal shreds from its body. These shreds were slag, useless bits of material. It was as if the divine sword had developed a spirit of its own as it actively evolved, aiming for a state of perfection. The rain of lightning eventually enveloped Ling Han and his divine demon sword, its brilliance illuminating the sky and universe. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.